First of all, on behalf of the INASL Governing Council, I would invite you to this pre-conference Global NASH Council meeting. And this time it is the 33rd edition of the INASL that is going to start from tomorrow. I think we'll have to learn a lot about GNC and even the first talk. What are the Global NASH Council and the Global Liver Council and registries? I think this talk would be developed by esteemed faculty, Professor Jober Yunasi also. And with this, once again, I welcome all the esteemed faculty, those who have come to attend this pre-conference meeting, as well as the delegates also. I won't take much time and we can start the program also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your words of welcome. Today, we gather to address one of the most pressing hepatological challenges of our time, commonly known as MASL, with a special focus on South Asia and Southeast Asia. It is my honor to invite globally renowned liver experts and doctors with compassionate heart and healing hands. I invite Dr. Ajay Duseja, sir, Secretary General INASL and Organizing Chairperson INASL 2025 for the welcome remark and to set the stage for today's enlightening discussions.
Thank you, Ankita, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, on behalf of the organizing committee and the local organizing committee of INASL 2025, it's really a proud privilege for us to, welcome you all. And we're starting with this pre-conference CME today. So I must give you some background. Professor Zubair Yunusi is here, and we have been collaborating for last, 15, 20 years now, more than that. And he was in Chandigarh earlier many times, but then there was a gap in between. And you all know that his area of research is NASH or MASH. So this, Global NASH Council, he will be speaking much more on that, but he's been chairing this for last many, many years. Traditionally, this Global NASH Council meeting was happening on the sidelines of ASLD or EASL. But then for last few years, what we saw was that this GNC meeting did happen on the sidelines of APASL, Turkish Association, and some of the other meetings. So that is the time I requested him 2 years back when we were, allotted this in INASL 2025 that can we also have a pre-conference or a GNC meeting in Chandigarh on the sidelines of INASL, to which he very kindly agreed. And we have been, discussing on this agenda for this meeting for last almost 1.5 years now. So we were just thinking that what should we do? MASLD, we have a tomorrow full day symposium on MASLD, and all the stalwarts of MASLD, global stalwarts, are going to be there tomorrow. So we were just wondering what should we do today as a GNC meeting. So I discussed with him, and we thought that let's focus today on the South Asia, and not only South Asia, because we also had people from Singapore, Malaysia, Myanmar. So we thought it becomes South Asia and maybe Southeast Asia. Somehow, Chan Wok-kyung couldn't join us from Malaysia. Wong from Hong Kong also couldn't join us. So we have less of East Asia representation, but we do have people from South Asia. So we thought that let's focus today on purely on some of the issues of MASL which are very peculiar to South Asia, about our diet, about our socioeconomics, about the availability of NITs, availability of drugs, all those things I think may be slightly different. So we thought that we will focus on the genetics. So we thought we'll focus on that today. So with this, I think I'll now invite first Professor Zubair Yunusi to give us the opening remarks from the Global NASH or MASH Council perspective, and then I think we'll start with the main program.
Thank you very much, AJ, and it really is a pleasure again to be here with my friends, and that's my third time now in Chandigarh. So this is the city that I've visited more than any other city in India. So what I'd like to do is to just spend, this is the agenda that AJ sent me a few days ago. But my task is really to tell you what is Global NASH Council, what is Global Liver Council, and what is it that we are trying to accomplish. We can go just to the talk, yeah. Yeah. So we can, I guess JJ wanted to have the chair people come in and have us a seat, and we can actually start the program from that point on. So,
So, for the first session, I am delighted to invite Professor Yogesh K. Chawla, former Director, PGI Chandigarh. Welcome, sir. Professor R. K. Dhiman, Director, SGPGIMS Lucknow. Most welcome, sir. And Dr. K.T. Shenoy, SGMC from Trivandrum. Welcome, sir. Over to you, sir.
all right. Well, thank you very much. Of course, I ignored this important part, but what I'd like to do is to just give you an update about what is Global NASH Council and what is Global Liver Council and how do we actually put this together. I'm a big believer that liver is not just based on what we study in the United States or in Europe. This is a global problem and we have to deal with it as a global entity. And if you look at our societies historically, maybe there is more collaboration maybe in the past 5-10 years, but historically they've been isolated. AASLD, APOSL, or EASL didn't really interact too much historically. So what we were hoping to do is to create a think tank or a network of global collaborators and academic leaders who are interested in advancements of research and really education and research in chronic liver disease. It was 10 years, actually 11 years ago. We started with probably about a dozen members in a few countries, and now we have 288 members from 63 different countries. And in addition to a lot of things you'll see in terms of resources, we also have a global registry, and I'll describe that in a second, and 35 projects that's ongoing. The global registry, again, was an idea to create a real world type of data from different regions of the world, so we can actually have an opportunity to compare MASLD or NAFLD used to be called from different regions of the world. So we have 38 global sites with the global registry that has so far enrolled over 18,000 subjects, and all the data is collected through e-data collection, and of course there is a global consent process and IRB approval. The IRB has provided us approval for enrolling 100,000 patients. Now these patients will have baseline data and also follow-up data up to 50 years of follow-up. Of course, I'll be dead long before this. Initially, we started with viral hepatitis and NAFLD, and then we added some others. So we currently have 6 categories of patients that can be enrolled. MASLD, chronic hepatitis C, chronic hepatitis B. We also have added Delta virus, primary biliary cholangitis, and ALD. The criteria to enroll are pretty standard. You can take a look at them. But what is more important is that we do collect 153 clinical data points with 30 different laboratories, as well as radiology, pathology, NITs, whatever is available. In addition to these, we also collect questionnaires for quality of life, work productivity, for at least 5 questionnaires for everyone. And for the MASLD patient, in addition to these questionnaires, we also have an activity questionnaire, a nutrition questionnaire, and a short form of food insecurity questionnaire. For PBC, We have a couple of other questionnaires, PBC40 and 5D-Itch, and for alcohol, we are now implementing Audit C. So I wanted to tell you that the depth of the data that you get in this kind of a data set is really immense. Now, because of the logistics, not all patients, because this is not a prospective study, people don't have to actually do these labs specifically for this study. So we get what we get, and that it may not be always complete, but there are certain data points that are required, and there are others that can be optional. This is sort of our data entry platform. Once IRB approval is obtained by the site, we then activate the site, and everything is actually entered through a secure portal. Now, there are sites that don't have good internet. I'll give you an example of our colleagues in Cuba. So for them, we have actually created an identical spreadsheet that they complete and send it to us, and then we combine it. These are the sites that have been very active. On the left, with Professor Yu from Taiwan leading the pack, actually enrolling more than even myself. And there are a few sites on the left, bottom of the list, who are just starting. So it's not like they're not active, but they've just started recently. So as you can see, the majority of the patients that we have are MASL D, almost 10,000 patients with MASL D. But we have hepatitis B, hepatitis C, ALD, and also PBC enrolled. GNC and GLC, we have been endorsed by a number of important societies, including INASL, ISL, ALE, and others that are listed here. The governance, this is really not my organization. This is ours, and this is really what we want to do, is to basically create a leadership and infrastructure that will encourage and enhance collaboration. So we have a steering committee that sort of is led by chairs of each one of these committees that you see. MASL D committee, that's currently co-chaired by Shira Zilbersagi from Haifa, Israel, Laurent Castera from Paris, and Vincent Wong from Taiwan. Not from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, China. We have a policy and public health committee that I chair. ALD committee is chaired by Ashwani Singhal. You probably know Ashwani, as well as Robert Wong. But Alexander Krog is very much involved, and Maya Thiele, also from Denmark. JP Arab from VCU now, quite involved. We have a patient advocacy committee, cholestatic liver disease committee, a viral hepatitis committee, which is George Papatharides from Greece and Maria Buti from Barcelona. We have a pediatric hepatology committee that's led by by Rohit Kohli and Lorenzo from Milan. And we also have an APP committee. Each committee has at least 12 members, all very renowned hepatologists in their field. We meet, depending on the committee, either once a month or every 3 months. So we don't want to burden people, but as long as there is actually issues to discuss, we do meet and discuss projects. The purpose of the meeting of the committee is discuss ongoing projects, come up with proposals for new projects, and then really monitor implementation of the projects. As AJ mentioned, we have initially started our meetings on the sideline of AASLD and ISL, but now we've been the lay, the Saudi Society, the Turkish Society, APOSL, and of course INASL now, and hopefully that'll continue to increase in terms of our engagement, everyone's engagement. The theme of our projects, as I mentioned, we have a global perspective. We like to sort of look at outcomes and clinical research. And in that context, the clinical outcomes would be looking at natural history of disease, of liver disease, especially MASL D. That means obviously long-term studies of cirrhosis, liver cancer, mortality, liver transplantation, NIT performance in different regions of the world, We have PROs in quality of life research, economic analysis, and then we have a special interest in nutrition lifestyle. Shira Zilbersag, who's now actually actively involved with us, she works with us 20% of her time, has taken that on and has 2 or 3 other additional nutritionists and exercise specialists who actually are focusing on this. We have an interest on health disparities and stigma, published probably the most important stigma paper in NAFLD a couple of years ago, and we have one with ALD. We do some policy projects, and then, of course, as I mentioned, the real-world practice sort of issues related to practice guideline implementation, patient provider surveys. We do a lot of surveys of our members as well as others, etc. So the resources that we have all these expertise, as I mentioned, in addition to PRO development of instruments and implementation, quality of life, fatigue, work productivity. It's very unique, sort of, we were leaders in that field and liver disease. Large databases, and I'll show you some of the databases that we use. Economic analysis, Markov modeling, we do some of those. We have published some of the important systematic review and meta-analysis. And then we also have a center pathology expertise with Zachary Goodman. Some of you may know Zach Goodman. Zach was the second in command with Ishak, so that's really Dr. Ishak's sort of mentee who's actually taken over. He is world renowned. And then we do have a core research laboratory with a core biobank. The data sets, the large data sets that we have access to and we have been using for years, NHANES, which is a US database, global burden of disease, which is global, difficult to actually analyze unless you know what to do. We have NVSS, which is the mortality data set, and I'm going to show some of this data tomorrow in my talk on epidemiology. Places data, NIS data, UK Biobank from United Kingdom. We have probably about 5,000-6,000 patients in NASH in our NASH data sets. The global NASH project that we just implemented recently, and registries, and then of course the global surveys. In terms of expertise that we have locally, now that's expertise that we have, but we also have collaborators that can help us. We have 2 PhD statisticians, health economist, database expert, as I mentioned, a laboratory expert, and other experts that are here as well. We do have about 4 or 5 trainees, either fellows. Marcos Calagueras is a fellow, GI fellow at Harvard, who's actually with us. We have 1 fellow from Mayo Clinic with Manal Abdul Malik, and then we have 2 other students who are part of what we're doing, residents. The projects we actually propose, and it's voluntary. People actually can join or not join. It really is not required, but if they join, of course, they get the benefit of being part of the study and collaborators. In terms of regions, initially we started with a lot of emphasis on US and Europe. Over the past 5 years, we did have a lot of projects with Middle East, North Africa, through collaboration with Saleh Al-Katani and Mohammed Al-Qassas from Egypt, and also, if you consider Turkey as Middle East, and with Yusuf Yilmaz from Rize. 2 years ago, we started a good collaboration with Latin America, with Maria Pessoa, as well as Adrian Gadano and Marco Ressi. We are pushing a big-time collaboration both in China with Dr. Fan and also in Mongolia. Africa, the continent of Africa has been completely a black box in terms of MASLD. We just don't know what the prevalence is. We think it's low, but it is actually probably just unknown. So we have created a task force to address that. So there is actually a need for more active participation for Southeast Asia and South Asia. I'm not going to go through each one of these projects for you, but you can see of the 35 projects, some of them are really probably the most impactful projects. Our stigma project, we actually published in gastroenterology a global consensus guideline or recommendation for MASLD that's in publication now. The only other project that I'd like you to focus on is the global mast cell project. Initially, it was liver biopsy. This is every patient that has had a liver biopsy. The data was collected. We have 18,000 patients with a liver biopsy, and there are 3 additional sub projects of this. So these are the other projects, especially on the SLD, alcohol, and other areas. We are starting a stigma of ALD already. Academic productivity, the Council has published 72 articles, 66 is already published and 6 is accepted. We have presented over 100 presentations for the ASLD. We just got 18 acceptances with 4 orals, 3 positive distinction, and the rest of our posters. Again, these are the publications. I'll load this up on our website so you can see it. Again, not specifically important for this talk, but again, at the end of the day, this is not only to promote science and collaboration and friendship, but also become academically productive. So I would submit to you that GNC and GLC has been established as a successful global collaboration through the help of a lot of people in this room to really address some of the global issues related to steatotic liver disease, both mast cell and ALD, as well as viral hepatitis. And we are just starting PBC now. We have good resources, and of course we will need more if we are going to do a lot more projects. There are currently a great deal of really good projects, and I know Dr. Shalimar has been extremely active in some of our projects, and both in terms of the surveys, but also in terms of this global mast cell project that we have, and of course AJ has been one of our biggest supporters from day one, and Yogesh has always been our mentor and friend and colleague that's pushing all of us. So I think we need to really figure out a way to bring more representation from this region, so that at the end of the day, when we go to a meeting, we have data that's actually is not only credible, but also impactful in this area. So with that, I'm going to stop, and thank you again for putting this together, AJ, and all of my colleagues. So I'll be glad to discuss or maybe ask if there are any questions for how to do this. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Sir. The only thing which I found that the PBC and then not involving the autoimmune hepatitis, which is now increasingly seen in our area, and PBC, if I stand to correction by our colleagues, is rare in our country, is very rare in our country. I myself, with about nearly 30 to 35 years experience, I can only show only with the fingers, how many proven cases of PBCs are there. Yeah. I think autoimmune hepatitis, ALD, as a global, you can include in this project, sir.
So the choice of what disease you want to enroll is up to you. You can actually enroll in all 5, or you can enroll in 1. It's entirely up to you. And of course, based on the reality of what you have. If you have an interest in PBC and you see a lot of patients, then PBC that's what you want to do. But if you want to do alcohol, it's Ashwani single and now moved to Louisville. His interest is alcohol, so most of the patients he enrolls is from alcohol and not in the other areas. So that's actually the flexibility of that what this would allow. You just ignore the other type of liver diseases.
Zubair, that was a wonderful talk and an overview of what you told us about GNC. I was only wondering, can the other departments like endocrinologists or cardiologists, have you taken them also into your projects, or have they initiated that?
Yes.
Well, diabetes is a major problem in India, so also obesity is increasing.
Yes.
And if we are focusing on mast cell, then this may be, including those guys, may be worth.
So we have probably about 10%, 10 to 15% of the membership is actually endocrinology now. Just specifically those who are interested in diabetes. We have started last year to also include more and more primary care. We have a couple of cardiologists, but that's another area that we need to go after. So to us, those are the areas that's going to be extremely important that they are a part of us, especially endocrinology, but also cardiology and primary care. Cardiologists are too busy and they've got a lot of things and they want to have, they want to basically have everything under their umbrella. So it's harder to get them, but we are actually trying to bring cardiologists not only from the United States, but from everywhere across the globe. So, for example, for endocrinology, we have someone from Hong Kong. We have someone from South America. We have Michael Rode and two other endocrinologists from Europe. So yeah, absolutely, you're right. We should open that part of our collaboration as well.
And I was only wondering, is there any forum or somewhere where your projects have been published? Just a snapshot, what has been the conclusion of these projects? That would be worth giving an information to the people to get stimulated for joining GNC.
We have a website, and there is actually a section of the website that is primarily on what we have actually created. For example, Shira Zilbersagi and a couple of other folks created patient and provider education material for both adults and for kids. That's absolutely incredible. And it's now being translated in at least 3 or 4 different languages that people are using. So that's a resource that we invested, and it's now free for people to use and disseminate. But there's also a section where people can go and see what we have. What we probably haven't done that enough is to disseminate the information periodically through a newsletter, and we are starting that as well, so that every few months you see what's the enrollment in the registry, what are some of the publications, what are some of the new projects you'd be interested in. So that's actually a great idea, and we have started that, but I think we need to get on it even more seriously.
Sir, in your registry, what is the pattern of multimorbidity? Because one of the things which is of great interest in MASH is the individual role of morbidity.
Yeah.
For example, diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and obesity, as indicated either by the body mass or by visceral fat or visceral adiposity. So what is the quantum of play between these 5 or 6 multimorbidity, and which of them could be an important target for intervention?
Yeah, that's a very good important point. Remember something, the registry is real world registry. So we can't, for example, require that people should do a DIXA scan to look at muscle mass, right? So, but if they have it, we collect it. So if you have 18,000 patients, for some of those patients, we may have things that you could assess cardiac sort of risks, or muscle sarcopenia risk, or kidney risk. So we will have it, but may not be available for all patients. Every comorbidity that's been associated with MASLD is actually being collected, not only with systematic historical data collection, but also for some, we actually get a laboratory test. I'll give you an example. We know now that at least in the United States, 20% of patients who were quote unquote called MASLD, they have, if you do PET testing for alcohol, they exceed the amount of alcohol consumption. So they're probably either met ALD or ALD. So for some of these, for 5,000 patients, for example, we have serum, and we are going to actually look at PET testing to those patients so that you can understand what are the differences in terms of ALD misclassification or met-ALD in different regions of the world. My own hypothesis is that it's high in Europe, misclassification, high in the United States, but probably pretty low in Middle East places like Saudi Arabia, where there is not a lot of alcohol available, at least to folks. So it will give us a great story about how we are actually dealing with these other issues that are related to comorbidities, both in terms of metabolic comorbidities, but also these other issues that we have not actually been able to ascertain very well.
Any more question or a comment? Yeah, please carry on.
Professor University, your presentation about the GNE's network works, publication, everything, very impressive. I'm just wondering, it is a time for the GNC to have its own standalone annual conference or something like that. It is to be associated with the big liver meetings that you have audience, but at the same time, you are now, I think your works have proved yourself to be what standing alone conferences with everything. You want to emphasize on the Asian Pacific, you want to emphasize on the European different aspects. I want to see a GNC conference. That's
That's a great that's a great idea. For some of you who may know, I'm also the president of something called Chronic Liver Disease Foundation in the United States, and we have an annual meeting called Liver Connect. It's a 3-day meeting, and I run that. And that's really part of that is to bring in the GNC members and CLDF members in around this one conference. In January of 2026, I'm actually starting a meeting in Paris with Laurent Castera. It's called Paris International Liver Meeting, and it's actually, again, a collaboration with Global NASH Council. It's going to be a 3-day meeting. Now, I think what you're suggesting, I've been actually trying to promote this also in the Middle East with both Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Turkey. But I think it's going to be a great idea to do this in a place that's central to most areas of the world. Part of what we wanted to do with the larger meeting is to sort of bring ourselves, introduce ourselves to folks so that at some point, we're not in competition with ASLD or EASL or a LA or a NASL. We're just there to help if we can. So having a meeting in a place that's actually central and can bring people from all over the world, I think it's a great idea. I think we should also, bring folks who are interested and create a sort of a small task force to see how we could do this. We do have the means to do it because Chronic Liver Disease Foundation has been actually putting large meetings for the 25 years, and I'm their president, so we can put this together.
Thank you. I think we close the session. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thanks again.
Zobair, for
Appreciate
your
it.
wonderful presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks to the chairpersons for their precious time, and thanks, Dr. Yunus, for your address. Now we transit to our next session, that is on MASL issues peculiar to South Asia and Southeast Asia. And for this, I am delighted to invite on stage the chairpersons. I invite Dr. Kim Mong Win from Myanmar, Yangon GI and Liver Center. Before that, we have a commemorative photograph. Speaker, sir, I request you to please join us on stage for this commemorative photograph. INASL 2025 pre-conference session. Can we have a round of applause for these gentlemen? Thank you so much. So, I invite our chairperson, Dr. Sita Ram Chaudhary from Kathmandu, Nepal, KIST Medical College. I welcome you on stage, sir. Dr. Abhijit Chaudhary from Kolkata, ILDS. And Dr. Naveen Bhagat from PGI Chandigarh. The dais is all set with the graceful presence of our chairpersons. Over to the chair for taking the session further.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the panel of chairpersons, let me start the ball rolling with the issues that we are going to discuss in South Asia, peculiar to South Asia and Southeast Asia. So the first speaker is going to be Dr. Arun Valsan, who is from Kochi and is one of the brightest persons that the Indian hepatology looks forward to. Over to Arun.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Chair. So I'll be talking about the epidemiology of MASL in South Asia and Southeast Asia. There are no disclosures relevant to this talk. So our prevalence is one that only 1% of the world is happy about. That would be President Trump. So we are aligned with the West and far removed from our closest ally, Russia. So we are almost following Western standards, most of the Southeast Asian countries. This may be attributed to rapid urbanization, the increasing affordability, shift from an agrarian economy to a more services industry, the cheap availability of energy dense and nutrient poor food, a largely sedentary lifestyle and reduced physical activity, and coexistent increased prevalence of other components of the metabolic syndrome. So the global prevalence of fatty liver disease is almost 24%. And we can see here that in the change in the prevalence, the incidence, the death attributable to MASL, and also the loss of DALI have all increased around 100 to 200% in the Southeast Asian region. We can see here that Southeast Asia has the highest prevalence by sub-region in Asia of around 42%, just falling behind the Middle East nations. And one of the highest prevalence, sadly, is in India and in the Indian subcontinent. And MASL is going to be the leading cause of chronic hepatitic diseases worldwide and is going to tip off viral etiologies and alcohol in the coming decade or so. Now, there is increased prevalence of diabetes, especially in the Indian subcontinent. And Indian subcontinent has surpassed the West in terms of prevalence of type 2 diabetes. And the prevalence of NAFLD in diabetes per se is around 55%. Again, the same is true with obesity, and in the Southeast Asian region, this is again kind of in concordance with the prevalence of obesity, and up to 70% of Southeast Asian people with obesity or overweight have NAFLD or MASLD. Again, we know that in MASL there is increased risk of cardiovascular mortality and cardiovascular events, and we can see that the CVD prevalence in this region is close to 18 to 20%, and which is in close concert with the NAFLD and the MASL prevalence in the Middle East and in the Asian region. Now, if you look at the liver-related events, we can see that as the fibrosis, increases, the overall mortality, the liver-related events, and the chance of hepatocellular carcinoma increases in the Asian subcontinent. Again, when you look at lean NASH, it's particularly concerning that the lean NASH is quite prevalent in the Asian and the Southeast Asian region, especially in countries like Vietnam and India. Again, if you look at the MASL and HCC prevalence, we are in the high prevalence zone where the HCC attributable to NAFLD is around 22 to 29%. Now, what are the key risk factors? Is it any different from the rest of the global scenario? So we know that the central obesity, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome without coexistent obesity are higher in Southeast Asians. And there is increased prevalence of advanced fibrosis despite a lean BMI in Asians. And F2 fibrosis or more is very prevalent in the Asian subpopulation. So what are the key differences between the global and the Asian or the Indian data? There are not much differences, but we can see that the lean mast is more commoner and significant in the Asian subcontinent, and also the fibrosis burden is more prevalent in the Asian subcontinent, and the access to healthcare probably is lesser compared to the Western nations. So the under recognition of significant fibrosis and the existence of silent fibrosis in the community level may be more and underappreciated here. So what are the key takeaways? So MASLD is one of the most important causes of liver disease, especially in the Southeast Asian regions. The prevalence of MASLD is commonest in the Middle East, followed by closely by Asian countries. There is a large volume of patient of NAFLD apart from other liver diseases. So this highlights the fact that we need to have more focus in identifying those at higher risk of progression of liver disease. We know that the childhood and adolescent obesity and overweight prevalence and NAFLD prevalence is increasing in the Asian continent, probably due to the thrifty gene hypothesis and also due to the increased prevalence of famine as been reported earlier. And this also places a growing strain on the fragile healthcare system existing in these countries. So it is right to take action and to take cognizance of this fact that the prevalence is fast approaching epidemic levels. I finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now next we have diet and socio-economic issues. I invite Dr. Akash Rai for this talk.
Thank you, chairpersons and all assembled. Special thank you to Ajay sir and Professor Unisi for this opportunity to have this talk on diet and economic issues with special reference to South Asia and Southeast Asia. So as we delve into this, the core data actually is quite limited. But once you start analyzing the disparities and peculiarities, you get to know stories which give important implications as to why Southeast Asia and South Asia should be looked at separate entities. So we'll traverse through 5 different stations. Firstly, regional peculiarities, then dietary peculiarities, economic issues, some success stories, and then gaps and opportunities. So as Arun was saying, that this region is a MASLD hotspot with a global prevalence of about 30%, South Asia 33%, Southeast Asia 33%. But within this region of hotspot, you have areas which are driven by social and economic interactions, which make them a heterogeneous entity altogether. On the left-hand side, you see these are areas where people live in less than $2 per day. And within that, you have got red, you've got blue, you've got yellow. These are all South Asia and Southeast Asia. That means within this entire zone, you have got socio-economic disparities which lead to differences in MASLD. And I take it to this recent paper just last month where we looked at food security and how it affects MASLD in different socio-economic contexts. If you have got a highly developed socio-economic area, there higher food insecurity leads to higher MASLD. Whereas if you go to low SDI areas, a high food insecurity can lead to actually a lower MASLD. So these are differences which again come out through this entire region of Southeast Asia and Asia, because you've got areas like Singapore, which is different than an area like Malaysia or Burma or India or Afghanistan or Bangladesh. So these all areas have got their individual indicators. Besides these regional peculiarities, you have some regional misconceptions, and some of them emanate from India, where rice is essential and vegetables are actually looked at side dishes, where being obese in childhood, having weight, indicates that you're healthy, where your cooking preferences with more oil is equal to better taste, and where women, specifically in India, eat last in majority of areas, making them only have less nutritious foods. So while we understand the regional peculiarities, we go to the dietary peculiarities. And here, it's a three-way insult to drive a perfect storm of refined carbohydrate dominance with region-centric traditions. You've got our sugars, our sweets, our jaggeries, and our chais, and I'll come to the chai a little later. Industrial trans fat practices with street vendors, street fried foods, and repeated eating, I'll come to that later again. And widespread use of tropical oils across dishes that are used throughout these entire areas. So to add to these perfect storm, you add in an imbibed westernization where you have imbibed all the bad parts of the Western diet, from fast foods and readily accessible foods, to add to your dietary consequences. Do we have data? Yes, this is from Bangladesh, where the importance of carbohydrates itself and rice as a predominant driver for MASLD was explicitly shown. And then we've got an India story from Professor S.P. Singh, and we're just discussing about it, about the risk factors being fried food, spicy food, chai, and we were discussing how this chai comes in, whether it's sugar chai, milk chai with chai, and we all love our chais, and non-veg diet. Paradoxically, there is also an evidence with the cultural vegetarianism, where you've got a wide proportion of vegetarian population, where your lack of access to high quality proteins might make you predisposed to sarcopenic obesity, which is again debatable. So questions remain in these areas also. I go to the cooking oil story. This is what you'll find in widespread areas of India, as well as Bangladesh. If you go to other street foods, you've got fried food. And this data comes out from a Tamil Nadu survey, 13 districts, 2,000 vendors, 76% use palm oil. Disposable of oil of only 57%. 24% reuse their oil. And the last is the topping up. You keep on using that same oil once, twice, thrice, 4 times, and about 5% don't even know how many times you used it. I go to economic issues, economic peculiarities, which start with high out-of-pocket spending. We are not Europe, we are not US, where you've got a universal healthcare access through insurance. Bangladesh, 70%, India about 40%, Indonesia about 32%. Well, how does it impact MASLD? Your screening is delayed, medication adherence is delayed. Insurance gap, again data from Bangladesh, that less than 1/5 are actually covered under insurance. MASLD drugs become fully self-paid. And we have the new entity of MET-ALD, where in India, the very mention of the term alcohol in the diagnosis would not only make you ineligible for any insurance, let us aside be liver disease. Lastly, you've got a food, environment, and economics conflict. You subsidize in countries for India for cheap edible oils, but the actual impact of those edible oils on subsequent obesity would be realized by generations later. You've got regulations, but you also have regulatory inertia. And you have got competing stories of conflicting interests, which is very evident when you have got the soft drink ads coming on the TV. Add to this a fragmented clinical referral pathway. We all talk about the FIB4 pathway, which is supposed to care from a primary care to a secondary care to a tertiary care. Do we have such systems in these countries? Actually not. Here you got direct access to specialists without referral pathway. So have we tried to look at the cost economics of these pathways in such settings? Urbanization and the new urban-rural of the IT workforce. This is how urban India eats today. Unfortunately, that is how rural India is transforming, with less of physical activity and more westernization with use of technology coming in. And this gets reflected in the Hyderabad paper of IT professionals, where it's a conglomeration of all these impact, where the prevalence of MASLD was more than 80%. Are there all race stories? No, there are successes. This is the effort that comes out from Thailand, where a structured program for trans fat elimination was implemented in 2018. And the WHO has put forward them as a model for putting in such practices. We have stories from India. This is 2020 of where we all love our Diwalis and our jalebis, of whether we can move from a trans fat to a no trans fat cooking. The sugar should also go along with that. You've got similar stories from Bangladesh, the vegetable program, and revival of the India's millet program, Sri Lanka's school nutrition program. But these programs and these leave us with knowledge gaps and disparities which we can leverage to get data out of Southeast Asia and Asia. We have now access to big data where your actual real-time dietary exposures in individual areas can be tracked and assessed. You've got tailored socio-economic disparities. Fasting as a practice has been there in India for ages, which you translate into episodes or concepts of intermittent fasting. We need to find country-specific, cost-effective ways of actual clinical care pathways and innovations of care using AI, digital care, and telemedicine. Lastly, pharma in Southeast Asia is comparatively cheap, which gives you the opportunity of providing or accessing the utility of these pharmaceuticals towards providing a more economized care for patients with MASLD. I summarize the peculiarities in East and Southeast Asia. MASLD in Southeast Asia is diverse and has got diverse regional variations driven by diet and economics. There are certain common themes which go across the diversity, which is refined carbohydrates, tropical oils, industry trans fat, and urbanization. Economics in MASLD in Southeast Asia exposes very concerning deficits in the system. We need for country-specific care pathways. And lastly, it's a belief that MASLD, food, and economics are an interlinked chain, and an effort to progress against it demands an effort in unison across all the elements of the chain. Thank you, everybody.
Next, I would like to invite Professor Singh to tell us about the insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Professor, please welcome Professor Singh.
Good evening. I'll be giving my thoughts on insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome in NAFL in South Asia. These are my disclosures. I begin with this quote by Winston Churchill: "Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." And NAFLD is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. The more we learn about it, we realize we know very little. This is the situation. We have made a lot of advances, but at the same time, we have been struggling to understand the disease. There are different people in different parts of the world looking at a small fragment of data and believing how important that is in the pathogenesis of MASLD or NAFLD, whatever you may call it. After decades of research, we came to the conclusion that this disorder is not due to a single pathway or two pathways. There are multiple pathways involved. So many you can see in this cartoon, and insulin resistance was only one of them. However, a lot of us decided to put all our eggs in one basket. And we decided that the most important, or in fact, many people believe that this is the only pathway involved in the pathogenesis of NAFL. This is a sine qua non, and insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Around this, the entire, the hepatology world started revolving. But somehow or the other, when people looked at data from different parts of the world, it was difficult to attribute everything to metabolic syndrome, because from most regions except from the West, metabolic syndrome was not present in even half of the population. So all of a sudden, this term dysmetabolism came up. This came up in different fora. Now, we had this original meeting where, MASL was proposed, and in this definition, you had a definition for dysmetabolism where you required 2 out of the 7 criteria to label a person dysmetabolic. And then we had, a split. We had MASLD, and now MASLD also had a definition for dysmetabolism, but this was different. Here you had only 5 criteria and you required 2 of them. Now, see, definitions are very important when we consider disease, when we identify. You think, in diabetes, people decide that, if you have blood sugar more than 80, you are diabetic. Then you imagine all of a sudden half of maybe all of us will become diabetics. By one single stroke, half of you are diabetics. So you have to be very careful. In vitamin D, the same thing is happening in vitamin D. You decide a particular, without any basis, you have defined what is low vitamin D. And then the entire country, all Indians have low vitamin D. You can't have a definition like this. We looked at, this, both these definitions of MASL as well as MASL, and we found that for Indians, for healthy Indians, this was not suitable. I'll come to it later again. And to compound it was the problem of, fierce acrimony between various groups, as is evident from this very nasty editorial published in Medical Science Monitor. This was really nasty. Whether you agree with me or not, you go through it and then you'll realize. And the scenario was such that INASL had to publish this, a call for unity. A call for unity. We must get united. This was, I think, another opportunity to mediate. Now, in this background, we have the South Asian riddle. We are home to 1/5 of the world's population. He said that we must be global, we must think globally. But when people sat down to define whether NAFLD is all right or not, or whether we need to have an alternative, they didn't think it worthwhile to invite someone from South Asia. Despite the fact that we are home to 1/5 of the world's population, 1/4 of the world's NAFLD population stays here in South Asia. And we have the South Asian NAFLD insulin resistant paradox. South Asians have greater propensity for insulin resistance, but a significant proportion of South Asian NAFLD population do not have insulin resistance. And to top it, we have this, evolutionary change, as already Akash and my previous speakers have mentioned. This is what our Indian team of 1936 looked like, and these are our current people. These are our current Indian cricketers. So there's a huge change in the population, and the other problem is, as has already been mentioned by my previous speakers, this perceptive problem of what is good health. In the minds of an average Indian, this is good health. This sort of a paunch is good health. And if that be so, once people have money, once people become wealthy, they want to look like that. They want to have good health. And obviously, the prevalence of NAFLD is just rising up, especially in the rural population, where it was less than 1/4. Now more than half of our population have NAFLD. We decided to take a look at insulin resistance in our population. We did a study with 600 NAFLD patients, and what we found was hardly just about 50, half of them had insulin resistance, and half did not have. When we sent this paper for publication to different journals, it was just thrown out. Rubbish. We were used to it. So many, big people had the paper thrown out. We were very small fry. So we kept on persisting until we got it published. And we found that when we looked at the histology between people who did not have insulin resistance and people who had, there was hardly much difference. And then we had, after that, a number of publications from different parts of South Asia. This was from Bangladesh. Hardly 40% of the population had raised HOMA. Then we had this recent publication from our own ICOND, where we looked at, metabolic. We didn't have data on a lot of things. Insulin resistance, we did not have enough data. But I have data from around 10,000 patients, and less than 50% people have insulin HOMA values of more than 2. So clearly we have a problem. And metabolic syndrome in the ICON-D data was only in 4 out of 10 of our patients, NAFLD patients from all over the country had metabolic syndrome. And this is the so-called South Asian phenotype. All of you know that we have more diabetes, we have lower BMI, we have more adiposity, and yet we have more of NAFLD. We attribute it to so many factors, to our diet, to the lot of theories have been put, but none of them have been tested. If you look at the BMI of the NAFLD patients in South Asia, you found it is very, very low compared to the West. It is less than 28. Most of them have 27, 26 BMI. Now this is from, that was from India, and this table shows from other regions of South Asia. Again, here the BMI is not very high. Metabolic syndrome prevalence is not very high. Hardly 1/3 have metabolic syndrome. Now this table shows you a direct comparison of NAFLD, Indian NAFLD patients. Most of them have, less than, not 30, even less than 28. But if you look at the West, it is more than 30. So there's a huge difference in the NAFLD population we have and in the NAFLD population in the West. And if you look at our population here, if you compare this with what you see in the West, it is obvious. We can't compare, and we have a real paradoxical situation where we have different, our cutoffs are different. When we apply the various cutoffs for fibrosis, FIFR and all that, it doesn't work in a population. So I conclude with the simple thoughts. One size does not fit all. Whatever you call it, it's a heterogeneous disorder. By naming it MASLD or whatever you may, you can't make it homogeneous. And there is more to it than just metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance itself. There are many more things, and within this short time, you can't address all those issues which may be responsible in our population. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now moving on to our next topic, which is lean MASLD. And I would invite Dr. R.K. Day, Associate Professor, PGI Chandigarh, to speak on this topic.
Thank you. So we know that most of the patients with MASLD are either overweight or obese, but around 19% of the patients are lean, and this lean is currently defined on the basis of BMI, which for us Asians would be less than 23. And the current global data indicates that lean MASLD has almost similar disease severity and outcomes as non-lean MASLD. So today what I will try to highlight is what is the lean MASLD data on lean MASLD in South Asia and Southeast Asian region. I will not be discussing the data from East Asia, the Middle East, US, Europe, or Africa. So when there was this nomenclature change from NAFLD to MAFLD and then to MASLD, there was a doubt whether patients of NAFLD would be captured by these new nomenclature or not. Now we know that there's an almost universal overlap between NAFLD and MASLD. But what about lean MASLD, which traditionally has been thought that they have got less amount of metabolic dysfunction? So what we found in our cohort of 170 lean patients with NAFLD is that around about 84% of them fulfilled the MASLD criteria, but less than 50% of them fulfill the MAFLD criteria. So obviously the MASLD criteria performs better than the MAFLD criteria in picking up the lean NAFLD patients. But the point to note is that still 16% of these so-called lean NAFLD patients do not meet the MASLD criteria definition, and after a huge amount of investigations, they would be labeled as cryptogenic SLD in our cohort. So what is the burden of lean muscled in South and Southeast Asia specifically? So in India, in the general population, the prevalence is around 6%, and among patients with muscled, it would be around 16.9%. Now, this is a meta-analysis, a recent meta-analysis of non-obese muscled in South Asia. This includes few studies, only the very, very high quality studies have been included in this. And what it finds is that the pooled prevalence of muscled among the non-obese population would be around 11%, and it would be around 36% if we look at the whole muscle group. We also have data from some other countries in Southeast Asia, particularly from Malaysia and Thailand. So in Malaysia, this cross-section observational study, like in India, it finds that around about 6% of the patients in the overall population have lean muscled, and among patients with muscled, 18% would be lean. This is a big data from Thailand, which has been recently published. So around 7083 patients of muscled from the Thai National Health Examination Survey. And over there, what they found was that again, among their muscled patients, 18% would be lean. So the burden of lean muscled is not unsubstantial. So pathophysiologically, we know that the pathophysiology of lean muscled is multifactorial, just like muscled in general. Insulin resistance possibly still plays a central role, but the role of other factors like gut microbiota, genetic factors, etc., may have a bigger role. Now, there's some insights that we have on lean muscle with data generated from South Asia and Southeast Asia in the recent years. This paper is still as a preprint; it's not been published. It's from Bijit Sir's group, and so what this study does is that it's taken patients both from the community as well as from tertiary centers, and it finds that patients with lean muscled, they have got more android fat as compared to gynoid fat. Now, using the insulin resistance is comparable between lean and obese patients, and the beta cell function is actually better in lean muscle patients. So how do we link the three together? So even though the beta cell function is better in these lean muscle patients, they get disadvantaged because of the accumulation of more insulin resistant android fat. So this is further data on genes and gut microbiota from Singh-Su's group, and over here this is identified PNPLA3 as one of the drivers in lean muscle as compared to non-lean muscle. We have similar data also from Sri Lanka about PNPLA3, and this study also identified that the lean muscle patients may be having a distinct gut microbiota signature. With respect to insulin resistance, what it found was that the HOMA-IR was higher in obese patients as compared to lean patients. But if we specifically look at the proportion of patients who had an elevated HOMA-IR, that was not different between lean and obese muscled. From Thailand also we have some data that there is a definite genetic signature at the genus level which can pick up lean muscle and differentiate it from healthy controls and obese controls. And in fact, an auroch of the combined genuses of Lachnosmyra, subdolligranulum and E. shigella, that has got an auroch of 0.82 for differentiating lean muscle. Now, point to note is that none of these genuses was actually picked up in the other study, which tells us the shortcomings of these studies with small number of patients, which is looking at big data like gut microbiota. What about the cardiometabolic phenotype in lean muscle? So we all know that the cardiometabolic risk factors is less common in lean muscle as compared to the non-lean phenotype, and this is corroborated by a lot of data from India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. So most of the countries of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Come to the performance of non-invasive scores. Now, this is some very interesting data from the Go Asia cohort. And what this shows is that the common non-invasive scores, FIB4 in particular, this has got very good auroch for picking up both advanced fibrosis and significant fibrosis. The auroch is acceptable for APRI and NFS, but poor for AST-ALT ratio. Another insight from this study, which is that the NITs actually perform best in the non-obese subgroup. And as the BMI categories increase, the performance of the non-invasive tests actually tend to become worse. What about the histologic severity? So there are few studies on histologic severity from South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the majority of the studies show that there is no difference in the histologic severity between lean muscled and non-lean muscled. The outlier would actually be by far the largest study. This is again the Go Asia study. Now, this found that steatosis, that NASH and advanced fibrosis was significantly higher in the obese group as compared to the non-obese patients. But I think the difference could here lie in the age. You see, in all the other studies, the age of the lean muscle group was actually younger, whereas in the Go Asia cohort, it was significantly higher. The other would be the definitions that have been used for non-obese, in which there is some confusion as to what is overweight. Coming to outcomes, very limited data on outcomes from South Asia and Southeast Asia, but this is a very good data from the Thailand National Health Examination Survey with a follow-up of more than 60,000 person years. And what it found was that the adjusted hazard ratio in lean muscled was not significant. It was only 1.28. And the important finding of this study was that it is actually hand grip strength and not BMI, which is associated with mortality. So we all know that lean muscle patients have an improper lifestyle, and so the guidelines have suggested lifestyle interventions targeting a weight loss of 3 to 5% as lower as compared to non-lean muscle on the basis of the RCT by Wong from Hong Kong. But I think when we are advising this in general practice, we need to be aware, we need to keep this in mind, that when we are targeting the weight loss, the muscle mass should not decrease, and so the exercise component will become very important. There's very limited data on pharmacotherapy per se in a lean or non-obese muscle, and this is some data from our department where we show that saroglitazar led to significant improvement in metabolic factors and also in liver enzymes. However, the other non-invasive parameters of steatosis, steatohepatitis and fibrosis did not differ between the two groups. Lastly, should the definition of lean be modified? I think the biggest problem is that lean is defined currently on the basis of BMI, and BMI is not a good measure of adiposity in general, and it is definitely not a good measure of visceral adiposity, the part that plays the most important role in the pathophysiologic driving of muscle. Now, in clinical practice, abdominal obesity, whether we look at waist circumference or waist hip ratio, that is easy to measure, and it's a much better surrogate of visceral adiposity. And indeed, we have found that central obesity is independently associated with advanced fibrosis after adjusting for BMI and metabolic risk factors. On the basis of this, the INASL has suggested that lean NAFLD may be based on both BMI and waist circumference, although more evidence needs to be generated before the suggestion can have more bearing. So to conclude, the burden of lean muscled in South and Southeast Asia is not trivial. It accounts for around 15 to 20% of all muscled and 5 to 7% in the general population. Apart from insulin resistant, distinct genetic and gut microbial signatures may be important drivers of muscled in lean patients. The severity and outcomes appear to be largely similar in both in lean as compared to non-lean patients. The data is limited from South Asia and Southeast Asia, but overall it is largely similar to the global data, including that from East Asia. Thank you.
So the final talk in this session is going to be given by Dr. Shalimar on associated alcohol and chronic viral hepatitis. Dr. Shalimar is from All India Institute of Medical Sciences.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. So my task over the next 10 minutes is to, the slide's not moving, is to take you something of what's the association between alcohol, viral hepatitis, and top it up, you got fatty liver disease. Over the next 4 days, you're going to have a taste of all of these, except the viruses. We're going to have free flow of alcohol. Sweets is part of our hospitality. As you can see, what's being served outside is only sweets with coffee. So let's look at what's the data in term for us. A look at fatty liver disease in India. Our meta-analysis, what Professor Yunus showed, 40%, say 30% globally, India is much far ahead. We have 40%. Data from PGI Chandigarh, general screen, 50% of fatty liver disease in blood donors, our data shows 60% in Delhi, and now data from Hyderabad shows it around 80%. So it's well known. Let's look at what's viral hepatitis in India. Recent data suggests 0.95% prevalence of hepatitis B, 0.32% prevalence of hepatitis C. The data too good to be true, but then this is official statistics from the government of India. Some surveys coming up that probably the prevalence is much higher. We need to really look into this kind of data, but that all suggests that almost like 40% of these patients would be having an underlying fatty liver disease in association with their viral hepatitis. So this is what we are going to talk about in the next 10 minutes, our talk, the South Asia and Southeast Asia perspective in particular. Recent meta-analysis shows prevalence of fatty liver disease in patients with hepatitis B virus positive patients, almost 30% across the globe. This percentage moves to almost like 50% for hepatitis C virus infection. So every second patient with hepatitis C virus has an underlying fatty liver disease. That's expected. So we know that what has been presented initially by my colleagues previously, this interesting study from Taiwan, 336,000 patients. Risk of cirrhosis in HCC as categorized by MASL status very clearly shows that the risk is more in those individuals who've got fatty liver disease compared to those who do not have fatty liver disease. Okay, let's go a bit in depth into this data. Let's divide them, those who are hepatitis B and hepatitis C positive versus those who are not. This is the yellow line is the risk of cirrhosis, and over here is the HCC in individuals who do not have steatosis versus those who have steatosis. So definitely there is a bump happening in the risk of cirrhosis and HCC when there is an associated MASLD. In contrast, see the difference between the red line and the blue line, that is with MASL and without MASL, a significant difference. And same stands true with the data on HCC. We've been talking about cardiometabolic risk factors. Let's go in more depth into this data. When you divide based on the cardiometabolic risk factor, data comes very clearly that as the cardiometabolic risk factor increases, your cumulative incidence of cirrhosis in hepatitis B virus patients with fatty liver progressively increases as the number of cardiometabolic risk factors increase. How about mortality? This large data of 8,000 patients with hepatitis B and steatosis clearly shows that those who have fatty liver disease have a higher mortality compared to those who do not have fatty liver disease with hepatitis B virus infection. Same stands true when you look at this data in depth as per the cardiometabolic risk factors. As the number of cardiometabolic risk factors goes up, the mortality goes up over time. This data on increasing steatosis post hep C treatment and probably an increase in the fatty liver once the SVR achieved with hepatitis C virus treatment. Once you've treated hepatitis C virus infection, those individuals who got steatosis compared to those who do not have steatosis have a higher risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. This meta-analysis published this year clearly shows again what I have shown in the previous slide, that those individuals who got viral infection with steatosis have more advanced fibrosis, more cirrhosis, more hepatocellular carcinoma, and more importantly, poor response to treatment. Their SVR rates are clearly low. So this is a matter of concern when you got steatosis coming along with the viral infections. Alcohol consumption is on the rise. And as I said, we are going to swim in alcohol over the next 4 days. Alcohol is the commonest cause of cirrhosis in India. Average age of drinking in India is 14 years. This is published data. Alcohol is the commonest cause of acute and chronic liver failure, and we lose patients every day in our wards with mortality as high as 50% over the 4 weeks. This is a very interesting study, a population-based study, where you looked at alcohol consumption and they looked at their FibroScan values. And they divided these patients based on their number of drinks. I'm sure if you look at Indian data and we asked our patients, can you categorize 5 to 9 drinks, 10 to 13? How are we going to differentiate this from MetALD? There's so much of an overlap. Do we stop consuming alcohol at a particular number of drinks? This doesn't happen in India. This doesn't happen in other countries. And I'm not sure how this data was really collected. But if you look at very interesting data, shows very clearly that there is a dose-dependent increase in the prevalence of fibrosis and at risk. So this is what is over here is the FAST score. And there's a progressive increase as the number of cardiometabolic risk factor increase and the amount of alcohol. But more interesting is that the individuals who are consuming moderate amount of alcohol, as I showed you in the previous slide, and the MetALD, there is an exact overlap. Are they really? As Professor Yonis also said, is regarding the use of PET test. So there is a lot of misclassification which is happening in these patients, but important data to suggest that consumption of alcohol, top it up with underlying fatty liver disease, leads to more fibrosis, more at-risk MASH patients. A Korean study, large study, almost like 2 million patients, shows alcohol consumption on top it up of fatty liver disease increases the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma and also increases your risk of mortalities. So what we are seeing over here is more complications. So to summarize, what alcohol and viruses are doing to when you got a fatty liver is leading to more complications. More fibrosis, more development of cancers, more deaths, less response to treatment. So it's high time we need to manage both, and we need to look at what we can do to reduce the consumption of alcohol, what we can do to control the viral hepatitis, and also, more importantly, how we're going to tackle this fatty liver disease, which is going to become a major problem in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we have discussion with faculty and participants by Dr. Unusu and Dr. D'Souza.
Thank you all. I think, as I said in the beginning, the purpose for this, INASL CME was to discuss MASL issues peculiar to South Asia. And what we had thought, both of us, that epidemiology, we know the prevalence is high in India or in South Asia or Southeast Asia. So we were just wondering what are the reasons. So Akash told us about some dietary and the economic issues. So are they really different in South Asia? South Asians, we do understand, are maybe typically more insulin resistant. And this is what we wanted to hear. And then was the topic on the, the lean muscled. Is it more in South Asia versus, whatever the Western figures we have? And then the alcohol and the associated, viral hepatitis. Is it really contributing to more of MASL in South Asia? So this is what the aim was, but I think Professor CEO comments first, and then we can open it to questions.
Yeah. I think this was just such a fantastic, I was just telling AJ that we should have taped this, because this type of meeting really does not happen. The bottom line here is that you heard that this is a very heterogeneous disease when you look at, sort of different perspective. And I think that's really true from every aspect of the disease, where you're talking about pathogenesis, performance of biomarkers, where you're talking about, lean in the United States versus lean in Asia. There are probably different diseases. It's with one phenotype, and the phenotype is just, fat in the liver. So I think this ultimately, sort of justifies sort of coming together like this, because if we actually have data from this different part of the world, we can come up with the conclusion that this has really, this has to be done at the local level. I'll give you an example. Ultra processed food. There's a short questionnaire for ultra processed food. It's validated only in Israel, and we're validating in the United States. But ultra processed food that is actually being served here versus what is actually in the United States. Maybe we'll have some common things, but may not have other things. And I think making it local, making sure that you understand the reality of what's going on here, I think is very interesting. One thing about, and I'm going to ask, about the microbiota dysbiosis. It was really interesting that in lean NAFLD and MAFLD or MASLD that I've been promoting this for a long time, that maybe that has to do more with environment, what you're using in agriculture, or what you're using in terms of other food that changes the gut microbiome that contributes to the lean NASLD versus insulin resistance. What do you all think? I mean, whomever wants to take that on.
So Dr. Shalimar, please, you can come on the mic. We have these 15-20 minutes to discuss all these issues peculiar to South Asia and Southeast Asia.
So I think on the gut microbiome issue, we still don't have much data. We've looked at our biopsy proven patients, and we've looked at it's still under like what we have done is we've looked at the bacterial, we've looked at the fungal. We're getting some different signatures. There is some data even to suggest that Candida possibly plays a role, and there could be possible differences in these gut microbiome which are possibly responsible for that. I think that is possibly a role. Regarding the whether it is the chicken and story, what came first is not clear. But then definitely there are some signatures in terms of the microbiome and the microbiome.
So 10 years back, we had done this study where not the qualitative difference, but the quantitative difference we looked into our patients with NAFLD. So we had done their, duodenal aspirates and subjected it to routine culture to see whether they fit into SIBO, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And we did find SIBO in them, but there was no difference between the lean versus the non-lean group. Very small group we had, numbers were very small, but that was a proof of concept study that time. Dr. Nipan, you have a comment before that. I think maybe Akash, you talked about the food insecurity issue, and there's some concept of what they call, the food oasis versus food desert. Food desert is, you don't have access to a good quality food, right? Or for that matter, even the quantity. Similarly, food oasis is that you have access to, good food, nutritious food, balanced food, fruits, vegetables, all that becomes food oasis for you. Food desert is that you don't have. And people, those who are in that zones of food desert, may be more of, fatty liver because, they have unhealthy food. So in South Asia or Southeast Asia, did you find, I know we don't have any data, whatever the topics we had kept, there was hardly any data, but did you find any concept? Because this food desert is the concept which you also follow there, right? Yeah, so Akash, your thoughts, please.
No definitive data, sir. So this is this month's paper, I think, from Search Group about food insecurity. But the concept is fascinating. And if we just break it down into simple things, what we see, let's take a simple example of India and how I would imagine it is. We have got the poorest section of our society where access to food is, so food insecurity has got multiple domains. You've got access, accessibility, affordability, all of which quality, everything. Where access to food itself is a challenge. In those sections, if we actually think about clinical reality, the prevalence of fatty liver disease in countries like India, villages of India, where we expect the socioeconomic indicators to be low, possibly that will hold true. That those people in low HDI countries with low high food insecurity because of lack of access to food will have low prevalence of MASLD. Where the reverse might be opposite in well-developed countries where the concept of desert and oasis would be more accessible, where your food insecurities is driven by the quality of food that is being brought into there. And that would be the driver of a more increased prevalence of MASLD.
Yeah, that's actually fantastic concept. There are two papers we've had, the Journal of Hepatology paper And I think that again gives you the global perspective. You can't actually look at one area of the world and say the same is applicable to another part of the world. You have to look at it, and as you said, sort of food insecurity drives through probably hunger to lower prevalence, but food insecurity through food deserts, food swamps. I actually think that food swamps are probably worse, where there is food, but bad quality food, which is very common in the United States. You go to inner cities, you don't have grocery stores, you have these mom and pop shops, and you've got basically, high sugar, beverage food and ultra processed food. And we have actually looked at this in another US-based database, large country-based data set. Food swamps and food deserts were independently associated with massive mortality in the United States. Independently.
Yeah, so this question was regarding the food insecurity itself. Part of it is covered. The second is regarding the social media, the availability of education, as well as the physical activity, which compounds. The people see a lot of ads and the psychology of individuals. So a lot of compounding happens apart from food insecurity, and there has been a concept of food addiction as well as a concept. So how do you foresee economic aspect and individual contribution of all of these? A well-devised questionnaire, perhaps a systematic collection would be the way forward. I think. What is your take on that, Dr. Zubair? And the second question I'll ask after this.
Okay, I must add, I think we have experts from Myanmar, Nepal, Bhutan. This is a South Asian meeting, so we can have your opinions and your thoughts also. And obviously India, yes. And Bhutan, I think we have all the experts. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I think the importance given to the abdominal obesity, the visceral obesity, especially the Asian and then Indian phenotypes, are the huge belly, right? And the way back in 2007, International Diabetic Federation has clearly defined that the number one criteria is abdominal obesity, and next any two out of the rest of the four. Now slowly it's got diluted. In MASLD, they don't mention. And then in fact BMI and or the abdominal obesity, according to the Asian standards, they have differed. It's got a therapeutic importance also, because when the Asians lose the weight, they lose the weight from the periphery, but the abdomen remains the same. In fact, you see that some of the people will have a fold also. Many people have got a fold over the abdominal obesity. I think in our population, the importance should be given more and more to the abdominal obesity. And even if they go, diabetes is controlled, everything is controlled, weight reduces, but abdominal obesity does not disappear.
So just a couple of points, and I'll also answer your question. One, and then I'd really like to hear from my colleagues from Bhutan, from Nepal, from Myanmar.
I would like to make two important points. One is whatever the epidemiology of the MESL or MESLD presented in the Asian countries. If I have to take an example of my country, 70% of the people are living in the rural area where there is no electricity, no safe drinking water, and the data collected will be from Yangon or the Mandalay or big cities. So a lot of people will be neglected, and the data we need some more effort in. Two, the treatment of MESL or MESLD in these countries, definitely no pharmacotherapy, not available, not feasible. So the treatment or the control of the MESL and MESLD in these areas, in these countries, will be the multi-sectoral approach with the clinician, with the epidemiologist, with the public health specialist, and the food industry. Many multi-sectoral will be the main form of controlling the MESL, not the drug. I don't believe in the drug therapy will be applicable to this population.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Aman. Sri Lanka is also represented. Harshita is there. I'm sorry about that. In addition to UK and US colleagues, yeah, so Sri Lanka is also.
Yeah, absolutely. Just first to the question, you're correct. I think we need to make sure that we understand not only the urban area but also rural area, because again, the pathogenesis may be different in the rural area than the prevalence is certainly different. It's probably lower in the rural area than it is in the urban area. I think we need to understand this. Coming back to your issue of how do we really globally address this, it won't be with medication. It will be with policy. It will be with policy at the highest level to address the root cause of these issues, which is really obesity and type 2 diabetes. How do you actually change we heard about, for example, advertising of sugary beverages. In the United States, there is alcohol that you actually hear about every 5 seconds, and especially in the teenagers. They're targeting teenagers for the advertisement. How do you actually sort of address all of these at the policy level? I think it's absolutely critical. Medication would be a good adjunct at some point for some patients, but in general, to deal with this disease will be at the level of policy. Coming back to the issue of visceral obesity, we published something a couple of years ago. The visceral obesity is, once you control for BMI, is not only an independent predictor of fibrosis, but mortality. So you're absolutely right. We have to get away from BMI and focus on visceral fat. In fact, there is a new formula that's being actually promoted by endocrinologists that includes actually visceral waist circumference plus a few other things. That's very good. But you also know that there's a controversial sort of new definition of obesity called clinical obesity by the Lancet that was put together. And you have to actually sort of come back to that, because that's much harder to actually understand and go after. I believe that when we were actually doing this with Shira Zabrasagi, to look at all 4 or 5 different kinds of definition for obesity that we have, and to see which one in MASLD, which one predicts mortality the most. And if I can predict, it's going to come down to visceral obesity. So that's really important. One question you had, and I forgot what was the point you just the ones.
The food insecurity, the psychological food addiction, and the economic aspects and the advertisement.
Yeah,
so
I think those are just both in terms of just steatotic liver disease, where you're talking about alcohol or food in the United States and Europe and other area. There is such an incredible sort of power of the industry, the food industry, the alcohol industry, that actually fighting this again will be at the level of policy. It will not be at the level of physicians. We can promote it, but it's not going to be at the level of physicians. So let's hear a little bit from our colleagues from Nepal and maybe Bhutan and Sri Lanka. I think it'd be absolutely critical for us.
We are having plenty of these people now. Actually, a few years, 5-10 years ago, we didn't really bother much. We just got some fatty liver and we didn't know it was like metabolic and all that. Now we are getting conscious, and these people, they have mostly hypertension, they will get strokes, they will have diabetes. Many of these people, they have cirrhosis. We are not able to classify that these are MASLD patients or they are real different, isolated liver, blood pressure, hypertension patients or cardiac patients. So these classifications also we are yet not very sure in Nepal. But the tendency there is actually, even from the village people, most of these people will come and stay in some city, So these food habits, eating a lot, lazy, less exercise, these things are prevalent. But overall, clear cut, we don't know. The metabolic syndrome, how you will say, this classification yet we are not able to level to our patients. Mostly we will say these are hypertension patients, we will say this is diabetes patients, we will say this is stroke patients, and we will send them to that specialist. So overall, the scenario is there. It's very prevalent, but we don't really know overall how much this MASLD is doing or the different disease are doing.
I think two points I'd like to make, and I think this is something that Alexander Krog and I actually are going to write something about. One, I think we should not overinflate the quote-unquote burden of this disease. Because remember, NAFLD or MASLD is an umbrella term. I actually coined the term when I was at the Cleveland Clinic in 1996. NAFLD came from our team. It's an umbrella term. The vast majority of patients with NAFLD will not develop liver disease. Only the steatohepatitis type will develop liver disease. In general, only the steatohepatitis. So that's 5%. That's not 38%. That's 5% of the population. But still, it's about 4 times what we see in viral hepatitis. So it's a large number in general. That's what we need to do, number one, to educate people, focus on the real disease rather than sort of this phenomenon of MASLD. Second is that we're only looking at sort of the primary outcome, which is basically liver. I think we have to get away from just liver-focused approach to this. This is cardiometabolic sort of diseases. It's cardiac, kidney, liver, metabolism. This is the 4 thing that we have to have. They have actually the other 3 together, and they put clinical trials to look at these 3 different outcomes. I think liver should be included, and that would require then clinics that are metabolic clinics rather than just liver clinic or cardiac clinic.
Orko, you had a point? Yeah. Yeah.
Has already touched on that. We've got good amount of data from India that maybe MASLD is more prevalent in urban settings than in rural areas. So that could again be linked to all your diet and your dietary practices and etc. etc. And the second thing was about the use of waist circumference for the picking up, because like you said that MASLD is extremely common in the community, but only a small fraction will develop significant liver disease. So somehow who do we target to pick it up, and how do we then go on to risk stratify it? So traditionally the MASL screening per se in the guidelines has been targeted towards obesity, which is being defined on the basis of BMI. But say in settings like India, so we have a national program for non-communicable diseases which actually covers MASL. So there the policy direction is that the screening will be targeted on the basis of waist circumference and not on BMI. And purely from a policy perspective, that becomes easier, because to measure the waist circumference, you just need to carry a tape, not a whole weighing scale. So anybody can go on and do that. So I think from that aspect also, waist circumference is very important for picking up who is at risk of severe liver disease as compared to others.
So since you're there, I think you did touch upon the outcomes of lean MASLD. There have been a little change in that. We always believed that the lean mast cell would have less severe disease, which may still be true, but then came the data that initially we thought obese will have a poorer outcome. Then started coming the data that the lean mast cell actually behave worse than the obese mast cell, right? So where are we really heading on to, and is that applicable to South Asia and Southeast Asia?
The evolving data would be that both liver-related outcomes and cardiovascular outcomes are as similar in lean NAFLD as lean MASLD as compared to non-lean, or maybe worse. Particularly in the transplant settings also, when we go into that area, there the outcomes would be particularly worse in lean. But from South Asia and Southeast Asia, I don't really think we only have that data from Thailand. It's a big data, and that actually shows that there is no difference between lean and.
So if there's no difference as such, is there any point dividing these phenotypes, lean versus obese? I mean, MASLD is MASLD, whether you are in lean or obese. So ultimately, it really may not really matter. Is that right?
I completely agree with you. So I think when we were having the NAFLD thing, that could have been more heterogeneous. But now that we have got this MASLD, this is narrowing it down to those patients who would possibly having more of metabolic dysfunction and could be mimicking the MASLD, the general MASLD population. Remember that in our data, more 15-16% of our lean NAFLD patients did not fulfill MASL criteria. So there the drivers were obviously something else. We don't have all the.
We have 2 questions there, Dr. Krishnadas and Dr. Sunil.
Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful lectures. And I like the terms food swams and all that. And I think what we are missing is catching them young. Because the major food swams, I think, in our countries, in the schools, those canteens, there is so much of peer pressure from the children, so that the parents agree, and the parents also find it easier to ask them to go to the canteen and have something. And what is labeled as good food or healthy food in the canteens actually are, I don't think it falls into the label of good food. They are food swamps. So I think the International Society as well as the INASL should come forward and take some steps, at least to advertising and to meet the government to take this up. And second thing is, one of the major common advertisements that we see nowadays is on multigrain cereals. So today also I saw that advertisement. It was on multigrain cereals. It was the term that was highlighted was multigrain cereals. But what basically it is chocolate covered multigrain cereals. So ultra processed fruit that somehow we have to control. Otherwise, I don't think anything will happen to the MASLD crisis.
So let me just bring one thing to your attention. There is going to be a paper that Shira and I are writing with a group of people for Nature. That's Nature Gastroenterology and Hepatology, about the spectrum of this disease from the lifespan standpoint. Because what you're talking about actually starts in pregnancy, early childhood, teenage years, and then young, and then adult, and even older age. Again, to address this, you're going to have to then address this at every level, which is going to take power of policy, and you know, sort of not only power of policy, but actually sort of having the strength in a country to do it. It's going to be very, very hard.
So I have a conceptual question. I'm going to take forward what Dr. S.P. Singh said, sir. We have lean NAFLD, we have obese NAFLD, we have fatty liver with alcohol, we have fatty liver with viral hepatitis, with AIH, and so on. Now, what has changed in the last 30 years that this disease has blown out of proportion now? Was it existent earlier? Or it's a new disease? Or it's something old wine in a new bottle?
So I'll tell you, I think it has always existed. We just didn't recognize it, number one. But there is no doubt that the prevalence and the burden has increased parallel to type 2 diabetes and obesity. I'm actually getting to the point, and you'll see actually something in Journal of Hepatology soon, that we should be talking about the dynamic sort of spectrum of steatotic liver disease. Okay, that means basically alcohol here, MASLD over here, and it's a dynamic process. Why is it dynamic? Well, it depends where you are. It depends on two things: how much alcohol you drink, and where you are in terms of control of your obesity and type 2 diabetes. This is why people can get spontaneous regression and progression. My view is that they can go back and forth within this. So it's not a static disease. This, when you're looking at this in terms of this rather than boxed as a spectrum, dynamic spectrum going back and forth. But I think it's been always there, but just obesity has just, taken off.
Sir, now do you, my question is...
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Now, has the percentage increased during the adulthood? Like now we are seeing patients, let's say women, we are seeing some women whose premarital weight was, let's say 35, and then now they are at the age of 25. Now they are 35, their weight is 50, and they do not fit into the criteria of BMI or waist circumference. We cannot be considered them as high risk. So has this percentage weight increase during adulthood has been studied as a risk factor for MASLD?
Oh yeah, for sure. When you look at prevalence of MASLD in the earlier sort of, it's about 10% in childhood. It gets to about, when you become sort of adolescent, it's about 15%. When you become young adult, it's about 20%. So it goes up. Now, your question is it different in women specifically? And that really has not been specifically looked at in terms of body sort of composition, where the fat is, where the weight gain is. Is it all in the subcutaneous fat, or is it visceral fat? I suspect that it's actually visceral fat weight gain, then the prevalence would be as high as any other situation.
And also we see this regarding the blood sugar levels also. Like now we consider 100 milligrams per deciliter as pre-diabetes, but then we see some people who have fasting blood sugar levels of 80, 90 when they develop when they get a fasting blood sugar of 90. So they have all these metabolic complications, and they cannot be considered as diabetics also.
So in the ADA, I'm a member of the ADA's, American Diabetes Association's guideline committee, and they have decided that pre-diabetes is actually a risk factor and should be considered as a part of the diagnostic for risk stratification
I'm asking about the cutoff levels. You know, like now individual cutoff. You can't have, as Prof. Singh said, that you can't have a generalized cutoff level to everybody. So it depends on your baseline metabolic risk, and then as you go on, if you develop a higher fasting blood sugar level, you are at a higher risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we can have quick, Babla. Yeah.
So, sir, there are multiple risk factors for muscle D, like lack of exercise and bad dietary habits and good or bad stool microbiota, and there are multiple genes involved. So, which one is the main driver of muscle D? Because not of all are obese or not having bad dietary habits. Thank you.
Well, I'll give you my opinion. I'll tell you that it's a complex disease, and that by that I mean there are multiple factors that are environment and gene that's affected, and it may actually be different in one region versus another region. When you look at we looked at a SNP project with this collaboration between us and Taiwan. We have about 11,000 patients with 4 different SNPs. That some of the SNPs like MBOT has actually been associated with bad disease in one area of the world and not in the other area of the world. So again, you have to look at sort of the area of what is actually driving the risk. If I have to bet, and maybe that's not popular to say, if one thing, if persistently, we published the first paper in early 2000 and late 1999 to show that diabetes is independent predictor of mortality in these patients having diabetes. So if you want to bet on one thing, it was diabetes. We did another study recently that if you look at PNPLA3, it was only a predictor of mortality and bad outcome in the context of diabetes. So if I have to pick one that drives in almost every part of the world, drives bad outcome, it's type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
Sir, I think we have been always researching on the traditional risk factors, because the last 30 years we have been looked into diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, gut microbiomes, genetics, epigenetics. But what do you think that there are something which we have not yet evaluated in terms of environmental exposure? I think this is coming up a big issue in endocrinology. I think endocrinologists have been always like a traditional ones, but now they are looking at for thyroid disease and many of the metabolic disease. They think environmental exposure, maybe from early childhood or adolescent, like exposomes or other materials which may be changing our cellular metabolism. Your thoughts?
So I have to tell you that this is probably the area where AI and machine learning can actually help us, because there are going to be so many things that we have to put into the machine that it's going to be very hard to just take analyze it with just a multivariate analysis. For example, using plastic bottles for water, reuse it and reuse it. What is going to seep out of that, the chemicals that comes out, has been associated with type 2 diabetes, and it's associated now with muscle D. Having pollution, there is definite evidence that pollution is actually contributing to this disease. There is probably issue of stress, things that are very hard to actually measure, that's contributing to this disease. How do we get, which one is actually the most important combination of these risks that drive the disease in one person versus another person will get us back to what we call personalized medicine, because that's what you probably have to do, because that combination may be different for one group of individuals versus another one. But that's really important issue that we need to sort of keep in back of our mind, that we're looking at low-hanging fruits, but we're ignoring a lot of other important issues.
I think this microplastics theory is really coming up, and we have a paper, being presented in NASL on the animal study being done in PGI on the bisphenol A in rats and the association with metabolic issues, including fatty liver disease. So before that, I think my question before we wrap it up was the alcohol we have not really discussed, Dr. Shalimar, about the, about the MET ALD is a new concept which has come in now, but then again, in reference to South Asia or Southeast Asia, we really don't have data on MET ALD yet. But in clinical practice, what we have been seeing is it's either muscle D or is it alcohol, and within the alcohol, we do have a group where alcohol with metabolic dysfunction. who behave, worse than pure alcohol without metabolic dysfunction. But the overall prevalence of MAT-ALD is not much with us because we've not done the PET testing at all. But leaving that, again, I think your thoughts on about the MAT-ALD in specifically in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and because that was the topic here.
So I think it all depends on the drinking patterns. Like if we look at how much amount of drinks are we looking at to classify in a person, between what kind of group are you classifying these patients within the MASLD, MET-ALD or the ALD? The drinking patterns are very different, and I showed that paper where the drinking number of drinks were calculated. I wonder how that data is collected.
What I'm saying, do you the existing definition of MAT-ALD given by the Delphi consensus, if you use that, what is your clinical practice? How much of MAT-ALD do you see? In India, I'm saying we see either pure MASLD
Correct, sir.
or
That-
ALD
yeah.
with MAT. We see that MAT-ALD is a little group. So is that the same experience?
Same thing. It's like you see the extreme spectrums of both diseases. So
Let me
that's
make a comment to support what you're saying. That we have actually a paper that'll be presented at AASLD. I'm going to show the first time tomorrow, because MASLD is not exactly just MASLD. Never drank alcohol. Well, that's not true, because in the MASLD spectrum, you have someone who has never drank alcohol, someone who drinks one drink, 5 drinks a week, which is going to meet the MASLD criteria, or people who have drank before and actually stopped drinking 2 years ago. They still meet the criteria for MASLD. Each one of these patients actually could have different outcome. Because if you were actually drinking before and have binge drinking, but you're now MASLD, you have worse outcome. And when you look at the ALD patients, you've got 2 kinds of ALD patients that you just heard. You've got ALD with metabolic abnormalities, and then you have pure ALD, no metabolic abnormality. The pure ALD is really interesting, because if you have pure ALD, you're young, usually in the United States, you're African-American young men that actually binge drinking, and they have higher mortality, one of the highest mortality. And you expect that because these are the patients that comes in with alcoholic hepatitis, they don't get transplanted and they die, right? But understanding this MET-ALD, the MET-ALD terminology has to be refined. I agree with Alexander Kroc, and we have actually been pushing this, that we have to redefine MET-ALD, because it's not getting to these nuances of what's the interaction of metabolic disease and alcohol.
Both Nipun and Manu are here, so we're presenting again in INASL as a presidential poster from the ICON-D data of 7,000 patients. I think you're all part of that, where we've shown that even a small amount of alcohol, less than 20 grams, versus no alcohol, even though the numbers were small, so less than 20 grams of alcohol was also contributing to increased fibrosis in them. So I think that's another. So Dr. Dhawan, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say from the pediatric side, and your answer to your question was definitely obesity has changed in the last 20 years. The food access, refrigeration, easy access of food. Wherever you walk, people have a coffee mug in the hand and something else to eat. So the access to food, calorie intake has definitely gone up in children. So in UK, the incidence of obesity, overweight, has gone from 3% in 1970s to 35%. And half of our patient population will qualify as overweight now. What I want to highlight, I think you mentioned that you're writing some really impactful papers. The 2 observations I have is, currently, elephant in the room is obesity. And that is not talked about that much. It's talked about, but it's seen as, people will feel bad, you're obese, you're called obese, so don't touch it. In our setup, we don't even call obese now high BMI. High BMI is a wrong term because it was done in Caucasians who have a high muscle mass. It doesn't apply to us. So the BMI is already off the chart for discussion for us. When it goes to looking at data now, papers, somehow I believe there is a scaremongering. What we are seeing is high mortality in MASLD, but that's all-cause mortality. That comes down if you read the whole paper. The title of the paper is High Mortality in MASLD. That is metabolic mortality. So I think we need to address the metabolic, and you very nicely said in the end, we are putting something together which should call it as a metabolic disease, in other words, not just MASLD. And I'm yet to see, and somebody will say, no, you are wrong, a child up to the age of 18 or 20 who has advanced liver disease has complications of it. The literature has been polluted. There are papers say liver transplant for metabolic liver mast cell or NAFLD in children. But when you look at the metabolic workup on those children, it's very patchy. So we don't know what other underlying conditions they had. I think the focus for all of us should be, how do we control obesity? I think if you control obesity, everything will fall in place. And my one advice to patients is three things you do: weight loss, and weight loss. How you do it, I don't know, but that will help you.
I agree with you most, but just two things that I wanted to actually bring to your attention. That one, it's just not diet, it's not just weight loss, it's also the composition of food that is important. It's not just the quantity of food that actually would reduce the weight, but also the quantity. And the second, it's about lifestyle also. So it's reducing alcohol, it's not smoking, it's actually exercising, because there is also exercise deserts where people don't have any access to all of this. So that's really ultimately is going to but if you want to really look at one thing that can actually pull it all together, yes, weight loss, especially from the visceral sort of obesity side of things.
One last light-hearted comment: how many of you as an adult physicians believe your patient when they say, oh, I rarely drink, I don't drink? I think 50% accept and 50% lie. So how do you know? And the data, I think you published it, saying that the data from Bangalore, I'm yet to see an IT guy who's not drinking over the weekend.
No, I
or
think,
binge drinking.
No, well, I'm saying these 7,000, now we have more than 10,000 cohort of so-called NAFLD in the ICON D. Majority of them, when we define them as NAFLD, actually were teetotalers.
They don't drink.
No, not at all.
And they don't
So
lie.
we had, when we compared this low alcohol and slightly more alcohol, we had a very small group. So I think we do have these so-called teetotalers. That's what I'm saying. We see these pure things, pure muscle, and alcohol is, huge alcohol.
I'm going to throw another spanner now. We recently published in biliary atresia children who are this size, autobrewery syndrome. So their gut microbiome is metabolizing to ethanol.
Yeah.
So how much they are, all of us are having autobrewery as well. We haven't discussed that.
The endogenous alcohol is important, but just
we should end.
I think these are all very important points. This is really why we do this. This is why AJ wanted to put this together, is that this is such an incredibly hot topic and important to all of you, that the only way we could actually answer these questions is to come together.
Sorry, you wanted to make a quick point, and we then maybe wrap it up.
I just one thing said. We all look at these, specifically the prospective cohort studies. I think one study about outcomes. Metabolism is not a static entity. So we have people who are now today maybe non-obese, they may become obese. You're diabetic, your diabetic might be controlled. Yes. For those prospective cohort studies, and then the data gets mixed in that, how do you adjust for the progressive change of individual components of metabolism?
Well, that's why you have to be a part of the registry, because it's a prospective registry and we collect those weight changes. You're absolutely right.
So we're done with time. We haven't heard Dr. Abhijit speaking on any of your thoughts.
I was just listening to and enjoying everything. So if you allow me 1 minute, see, I work with rural Indian population. I maintain a population cohort in absolutely rural setting, and let me tell you, the main panorama of Indian fatty liver disease is happening in the rural India. And what's happening is abject poverty is gone in India. There is tremendous supply of food materials to people, and people have got a belief that we are in a newfound world when we should eat more, and whatever comes the way and whatever is Western and whatever is quick is good for us. While this is the supply side, the other side is also getting weight. People are not riding cycles, they are riding motorcycles. Even agriculture is happening in tractors, not in the usual plows and all. So people are going in small totos, which are the rickshaw pullers. No physical activity. almost in the rural thing. So we are getting more, and given the fact that we are predisposed to accumulate fat in the central region, by whatever genetics things, we are accumulating fat out there, and that's the way we are probably growing in rural India. I mean, that's not coming to the edifices called big centers of the country. So I think this is going to land up in our institutes in the next decade or 5-10 years or so. So ultimately it's food access and less exercise, less activity, and your very important terminology of composition of food being wrong. We don't have any balanced diet. We take whatever it comes to us, and whatever is quick and whatever we get very easily. So it's all like, in this imbalance. So
Thank you.
that's
Any more
my
thoughts
perception.
from the chairpersons, Naveen or anybody, please? Yeah.
Like Dr. Akash said, that in this part, the food deserts have less snaffled. I echo with sir that this will change, because ultimately everybody is exercising less. They're riding totos and not exercising. Ultimately, they will develop paunch, and the lower strata of the society will also have more NAFLD rather than less NAFLD.
I have to say that this is probably one of the best meetings I've been to in terms of interaction. This is why a group of people like this is so important.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you, dignitaries, for your precious time. Thank you, all the speakers, for such an interactive session. Now we will have a group photograph just outside the hall, or outside the auditorium. And after that, we have a tea break only for 15 minutes. We are rejoining at 7:25 sharp. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed the tea. Now we are resuming the session. Welcome back, everyone. Now we proceed to session 3, continuing our exploration of regional MASL challenges. The heart of our conference lies in collaborative leadership. Joining us now are our session chairpersons who will help navigate our collective insights. I'm deeply honored to invite on stage Dr. Krishna Das Devadas, Government Medical College from Trivandrum. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome, sir. Dr. G.P. Dhakal, Khesar University of Medical Sciences, Bhutan. Dr. Hasita Vijayvantha, National Hospital, Kandy, Sri Lanka. And Dr. Madhumita Prem Kumar from PGI, Chandigarh. So the dais is all set. Over to the chairpersons.
Can I invite Dr. P.N. Rao to give his talk on genetics of MASL?
Thank you very much. Well, it's been sitting through the last few hours here. It's been really an exciting and also really thought-provoking, in the sense that giving the directions as what we should do in future. And regarding the genetics of MASLD with reference to South Asia and Southeast Asia, disclaimer is that I try to search as much as possible. There could be some omissions, and then which we stand to correction, and those can be corrected, and then people can inform them about that. So for the definition of what is South Asia and Southeast Asia, these are the countries which we have searched for. And we know the genetic susceptibility to MASLD, and clearly these 4 genes have come into prominence in the earlier days. That is, of course, everyone knows about the PNPLA3 and the transmembrane 6 superfamily 2, and then which is responsible for retaining the TG in the liver itself, not allowing to go to the VLDL, and GCKR, which is a de novo lipogenesis, and MBO87. These are the 4 ones, but the story does not stop here. There have been several other things are also there beyond these 4. And then in the lower bottom, you can see the ones which are mentioned are in the red. And most importantly, there are some genes, there's a lot of heterogeneity there across the world, has already been mentioned. Some protective genes are also there, that is HSDB17, and which has not been found in our population here. First, let us see from the studies from India, and you can see here that from the top, from the Sherry Kashmir to the bottom, that is in the Kerala, and from Madras Medical College and Trivandrum, and northeast from Kolkata, and from the Bombay Hospital. Overall, the tendency is that in the south, Dr. Shana is here, who is an author of this, somehow or other, some of these things which have been seen from other parts of the world have had a lower preference in Kerala here. And also, I must also remind at this stage that in Kerala, hepatitis B genotype A is very common, when the rest of India is entire India is D is common. And I would like Dr. Shanoy to comment on this, whereas the common ones which have been seen rest of the India are not seen in this particular part of the world. And the ones from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and there are 3 studies are there, and one in sleep apnea, and then other variants, and more or less the story is same here, that the PNPLA3 is the commonest one, and they are also shown to be high risk for the NAFLD. And we have studies from Hyderabad, from our institute, way back in 2014, and the ones on the top left, you can see that the ones, the SNPs which are being associated with the NAFLD. Not only that, these NAFLD have been associated with the progression, the severity of the liver disease, in the sense that ALTs have been more. But of course, I must tell that these are not biopsy studies. These are only picked up by the ultrasonogram and then other categories. There are few studies are there which are associated with the biopsy studies here. The 2 things which important outcomes after these publications which have come is that one PMT gene, that is PEMT gene with RS7946, has been found to have a high risk in lean NAFLD in our population here. And we did the biopsy proven cases, whole biopsy proven NAH17 controls, elucidated the contribution of some of the rare pathogenic variants compared to the common variants. And most importantly, the variant HSD17B13, which has been seen in the Caucasians as a protective variant, has not been found in our population here. Then when come to the Bangladesh, we have some pediatric NAFLD, but in this pediatric NAFLD, PNPLA3 has not been have not been shown to be associated. And in other countries, although there are many genetic studies are there in many other aspects, but especially in the cohorts of the NAFLD, we have not found many of the publications here. When Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, then PNPLA3 again has seen, here they have done multi-ethnic studies in Chinese, Malays, and the Indians which are in the Malaysia, and the odd ratios for these things are different, and then highest for the Indians, and the Chinese has been the lowest here. In Singapore, again PNPLA3 has been shown, and in Indonesia, again PNPLA3 is very common, and in addition, they found that some other genes which they have tested, ADI, POQ, but the issue is that not everyone has tested everyone, all the genes. Everyone have taken only particular SNPs, and then they have studied those SNPs, if they are present or they are an absent ones. In Thailand, the studies are available in association with a co-founder, that is HIV, but we have not found any independent cohort of studies which are defining the genetics in NAFLD. So the summary of NAFLD genetic studies which we have done is that it demonstrated the association of PNPLA3 and transmembrane 6SF2, which has not been studied, not that it doesn't exist, but these things have not been studied in the rest of the population, which have got a higher risk for the NAFLD. Additionally, we have also shown that the PAR-VB and SAMO50 and PGP genes are associated with the NAFLD, and the PMT gene has been found to be associated specifically with a lean NAFLD, and as already told, HSD17B13 is not present, which is a protective gene which has been in the Caucasians. The whole exome sequencing elucidated the presence of a rare variants in the patients which are not seen in the controls as compared to the common variants which were seen across the study group. And not only that, since we are getting the patients from the persons from NAFLD from Northeast, and what has been seen, the differences between the South Indians and the North Indians is that, and we have found that the transmembrane 6SF2 is present, but and this has not been seen the Northeast Indians here. And they, as already told you, PMT, I have already mentioned about that one. Rest of the things in West Bengal, and then West Bengal is a study which Dr. Abhijit Chaudhary is the author, and in this they have done a biopsy studies, and they have shown that they are correlating with the presence of these gene variants. And this has also been discussed about the Malays, that the odds ratio for the three multi-ethnic groups are different. They are not the same in every community. So the summary is that the PNPLA3 and this particular SNP, which is the commonest one, is most consistently replicated in MASLD risk allele in these populations. It confers to 2 to 3 fold risk across the South and Southeast Asian cohorts. Notably, its effect size is highest in the Malaysian Indians, that is 3.5. And the other SNP, TMS6SF2, has a significant impact in some Indian groups, but was not consistently analyzed in all the study groups. The other loci, that is SAM50, emerged in the Indian exosomes scans, and PMTRS7946 was identified with the lean NAFLD. The MBO87 GCKR variants have been implicated globally, but lacked specific reports in the reviewed cohorts. The Indonesian study tested the ADI POQ was found, did not found any effect. Most of the studies are in adults. The only pediatric study from the Bangladesh found no PNPLA3 effect, mirroring mixed results in other pediatric series. But study designs are that all the studies summarized the candidate gene or a targeted exome approaches in the clinic-based cohorts. We do not have any large genome-wide association studies of MASLD have been reported exclusively in South and Southeast Asian populations to date. And this way we are lacking some of the information here. And here acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Ravikant, who has been helped me in accumulating this data. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful presentation. One of the challenges that the lower middle income countries like Bhutan and other countries in the region we face is the availability of the NITs and the cost of the tests that are available. Now, over the next 10 minutes, I would like to request Dr. Rohit Gupta to dissect this through the lens of South Asia and Southeast Asia. Dr. Rohit, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, chairpersons, Professor Ajay, Dr. Zubair, for this opportunity. So in next few minutes, I'll be talking about availability of non-invasive tests and cost of these tests. It's a difficult thing to find out the cost, but what I have done is, given the cost in Indian context, and then we could, during discussion, can talk. Now, this has been discussed that the prevalence in South Asia is around 33%, and in Southeast Asia, similar prevalence. But what is important is, as Dr. Zubair and during discussion, this came out that 5% of these patients will have NASH or significant fibrosis. Now, in terms of South Asia and Southeast Asia, this comprises of a huge population burden. Now, India alone, with a population of 1.5 billion, 33% of these having MASL, and so we are talking of significant burden of advanced or significant fibrosis in Indian population. So now we need test, and the importance is that the fibrosis is the strongest predictor of future liver outcomes. MASL overall, when we talk of mortality, is extrahepatic mortality, but as the fibrosis increases, it's the hepatic decompensation and liver-related outcomes which become bad. So you classify it as moderate fibrosis, F2 or more, or advanced fibrosis, which is more than F3, and both are called as at-risk MASH. Now, majority of trials, we are still using liver biopsy as a gold standard. But the problem is that these patients of MASL, it's possibly a lifelong disease in majority of these cases. They will require frequent monitoring, and liver biopsy, with its disadvantages of being an invasive test, sampling errors, inter and intra-observer variability, and it's obviously associated with morbidity and mortality. Now, what we are looking for are non-invasive tests, which can be done repeatedly in these patients, which are safe, which are cheap, and which can be applied at population levels, so that we can classify these patients who do not need specialist care and those patients who need specialist care. So non-invasive tests can be used either alone or they can be used sequentially. Now, just a brief, we know that there are three types of tests. One are serum tests, of which there are non-proprietary like FIB4, and there are proprietary tests like ELF. Then there are imaging tools, of which the most common is ultrasound, but we know that for ultrasound, it's not a very good sensitive test for fibrosis. But then we have a fibroscan, MR elastography, or corrected T1, and then we have combination like FAST, which includes fibroscan with AST. These are some of these commonly available tests with their recommended cutoffs to say their advanced hepatic fibrosis. For FIB4, we know that more than 0.2, 2.67 has a excellent positive predictive value for advanced fibrosis. Okay, so what are Asian country guidelines are saying, and what is APASL guidelines saying? So this is INASL guidelines. So for initial screening, what our Indian guidelines say, that use FIB4, which is a cheap test using age, platelet, AST, ALT, or APRI. Indian cutoffs for FIB4 is less than 1. Majority of other guidelines have cutoff of FIB4 as 1.3. Now, if your FIB4 is less than 1.3, it virtually rules out advanced fibrosis. These patients can be monitored at primary care level. If your FIB4 is more than 2.6, then these patients need to be monitored by a specialist. In between, refer these patients for fibroscan. Now, these are 24 guidelines from Taiwan, which was a consensus statement in patients with MASL and diabetes. There, the first investigation of choice at a primary setting is still FIB4. Easily available, non-proprietary. If your FIB4 value is more than 1.3, then they are suggesting fibroscan. What does APASL guidelines say? I would like to draw your attention to the bottom panels. So for primary risk assessment, they are advising FIB4 or NFS. And for secondary risk assessment, they are recommending as a blood test as ELF or fibro test. They both are proprietary tests, or using an imaging based test as elastography. Now, I think for me, this was an important study to quote. It came from Global NASH Council, recently published, where what they have done is it was a questionnaire-based study, and they were looking for patterns of utilization of non-invasive tests. And what they were talking about was availability and utilization of NITs, and there were other things they were looking at. But for me, the important thing was the availability of these tests. Total 321 participants from 43 countries, out of which 53 were from Asia. So I have highlighted in this red box, I'd like to draw attention to this. The most common non-invasive test which was used to exclude out significant fibrosis or advanced fibrosis in Asian countries were FIB4 and FibroScan. Obviously, because these are more easily available. ELF test was used only by 8% of clinicians which responded in this data and in this study. So in our countries, still FIB4 and FibroScan is being used. Now, this is regarding the availability. Now, what in this slide, what I have tried to do is look for cost of test in India. Now, the important thing in Indian setup is that there is a difference in rates in a government sector versus private sector. So in government sector, some basic investigations will be subsidized or will be free of cost. But if you look at tests like ELF, so I'd gone to sites of local available Indian labs, whether this test is available. So this test was available. ELF is available from Lal Path and Apollo Path labs at a cost of 4,500 to 6,000 rupees. FibroScan in government sector would be free or it would be very subsidized, but in private sector it will range from 5,000 to 10,000 rupees. MRI, PDFF, because it requires a special software, becomes tends to get a bit costly, ranging from 10,000, approximately cost is 10,000, and the similar cost is given in terms of US dollars. So I'd like to conclude that majority of guidelines, whether Western or Asian guidelines, say FIB4, use FIB4 as first test, easily available, can be done, requires basic investigations. If FIB4 is inconclusive, NASH Global Council data says that Asians are still using FibroScan. Problem is availability of FibroScan in tier 2 hospitals, not in tertiary care centers, especially in India, it may not be there. So primary test still would be FIB4, and ELF is not readily available in our country and is costly. Thank you.
May I invite the next speaker, Dr. Manoj Sahu, to speak to us on availability and cost of pharmacotherapy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, chairpersons. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity. So if you see the significant global burden, the majority in Asia, if you see the prevalence, this is the highest global rates in these regions. If you see the treatment cost, 8 to 80% of minimum annual wages across the region. And this is the depiction in the picture. This is the projected growth in 2030, significant growth we are going to see. The muscle burden is high in both the regions, but the public health systems are focused mainly on communicable diseases. This leads to poor diagnostic rates and late representation further compromising access to evolving therapy. There is no region-wise muscle-specific pharmacoeconomic studies or comprehensive cost coverage policy in place in both the regions. Limited access to new drugs. Approved therapy in India is saroglitazole, but this is a notable exception among South Asian countries for having a muscle-specific approved drug. In Southeast Asia, no specific approval in most of the countries. If you see the drug development timeline, saroglitazole from India and resmetirom from US FDA and other drugs in the pipeline, but there is an excess gap. If you see the 3 to 5 years regulatory lag between Western approval and Asian access, significant cost barrier. Only one of the 18 countries has muscle-specific approved therapy. As you know, saroglitazole is in India only. Resmetirom is US FDA approved, not available in Asia. GLP-1 agonists, SGLT2 inhibitors, they are approved for diabetes mellitus and offline use in muscle in Asian countries. And if you see that this is the projected cost, annual cost in different countries. Drug availability metrics, again saroglitazole on India only, various other drugs, this is the availability metrics in different countries, and this is the regional pharmacy coverage analysis in urban and rural areas. As we know, resmetirom, no Asian approval, but the API is made in India now. So we are expecting this drug in India also in future. Semaglutide, approved for diabetes, obesity, off-label use in muscle, widely available in India and various other countries. In India, the cost of saroglitazole considered affordable by local standard, but there is a substantial recurrent expense as considered to lower socio-economic strata. Other South Asian countries, due to lack of approved drug, most patients managed with non-specific agent. Costs are relatively low, but not tailored for muscle. Southeast Asia, the expenditure can be high relative to income. No approved drugs. Most costs stem from managing comorbidities. If you see the global comparison, the new drug, significant cost, difficult, many countries difficult to afford. This is the cost structure monthly, different countries and different molecules available. Some are used off-label in muscle. Treatment affordability crisis in this region. This is the percentage of minimum wage. If you see India, it's 12% and various countries in different other percentage. Singapore doing good. Comprehensive cost breakdown analysis. If you see, in addition to drugs, there are different other costs involved in managing this disease. In India, if you see in red zone now, more than 100% minimum wage, and there is other hidden costs also involved in managing this disease. Regional affordability. If you see the affordability metrics, that is the percentage of minimum annual wage divided into 3 categories: most affordable, moderate challenge, and critical affordability group. And in India, there is a significant barrier for the lower socio-economic group. Access barriers, there is a regulatory delay. Pricing policies, lack of coordinated procurement strategies in our regions. Healthcare infrastructure is not great. Patient awareness also not great, leading to low diagnostic rates and late presentation. If you see the detailed infrastructure metrics in different countries, hepatologists per 100,000 population, India it is 0.8. Different modalities, diagnostic modalities, insurance coverage, as we discussed before, it is around 20% in our country. And this is the readiness score. Some critical gaps identified. One is severe specialist shortage, diagnostic equipment scarcity, insurance coverage disparities. The healthcare system readiness, this is the regional comparison. If you see, Singapore looks good, India at the center. There are few regional success case studies. India's seraglitazole success model, regulatory fast track, competitive pricing, market penetration. What we learned from this success story, local clinical evidence is crucial. Bangladesh pharmaceutical manufacturing, 97% of domestic needs are taken care of by local production. The API is not great in Bangladesh, but this program is launched now. They are looking forward with API of themselves. They are at Bangladesh only. Thailand's universal coverage integration. These success stories can be scalable in other countries also. Economic impact and pharmaceutical industry capacity. Different countries, we need to have API manufacturing, regulatory score, and generic capacity. If you see, India is at a good position compared to other countries. Market opportunity analysis. The local production could reduce costs significantly. Investment requirements are needed for API manufacturing, regulatory upgrades, and distribution networks. Technology integration and innovation opportunity. As we know, AI also can be integrated, other modality also can be integrated, leading to significant cost reduction. We have innovation hubs proposal in India and different countries also. We need to integrate, we need to accommodate public-private partnership models also. Multi-stakeholder engagement metrics. There are different stakeholder, policy regulation, drug development, service delivery, technical support, advocacy, etc. And the expected benefits are there. If you see the success metrics dashboard, the cost reduction which is aimed by 2030 is 50% price decrease. The policy implementation roadmap. The key actions are regulatory harmonization, generic development as we discussed before, insurance expansion, infrastructure built, quality assurance and monitoring system, and the expected outcomes looks good. We need to advocate MASL inclusion in national health priorities. The government need to establish MASL task forces in each country, initiate a regulatory review process like the example I gave you, seraglitazole in our country. Pharmaceutical industry need to conduct market feasibility studies, engage with regulatory authorities. Healthcare system also assess specialist training, assess the audit the current diagnostic capabilities, evaluate insurance coverage gap, and international organizations, they need to support us. Mobilize technical assistance programs, coordinate donor funding initiative, facilitate knowledge transfer, and support policy development. MASL is highly prevalent in our region. Limited pharmacotherapy options for MASL as of now. Seraglitazole in India is a notable exception. Affordability remains the main issue. No comprehensive insurance or governmental coverage for muscle medication in most countries. Therapy is often out of the pocket and difficult to bear by many of us. The imminent arrival of new therapies looks very good. It offers hope, but also raises concern about widening treatment disparities in pricing and excess issues remain, if excess issues remain unaddressed. Regional cooperation on drug procurement, regulatory harmonization, and healthcare system strengthening will be essential to ensure equitable access to pharmacotherapy across our region. Thank you.
Again, thanks everyone. I think this was a very interesting session. I think this some of the peculiar issues we thought, other than the other, we discussed in the first session about the pathophysiology and other things. Genetics was left out, which was very well covered by Professor Rao. But the other important thing was this NITs and the availability of the drugs. So very well covered. I think we can open this to questions and comments. But I think before that, Professor Rao, I just thought you covered four important genes, which you said PNPLA3, TM6SF2, and the MBOT, and maybe GSKR also. But there were some studies earlier on, and this was done again from our group also. Uh, the role of iron overload and the some of the other genes, maybe genes of the gut microbiota. So, like for example, the initial studies did say about the role of HFE gene mutations, especially from the West. And then we tried to, replicate this in our Asian group, and we didn't find any role of HFE gene mutations as both the C82Y and the H63D. But then, again, the gut microbiota related genes also were also involved. So other than these four typical genes which you said, is there any data from India or from South Asia or Southeast Asia other than the PNPLA3, or what we're trying to look at this as the other than the metabolic or the insulin resistance and the other issues what we discussed, how much are the genes playing role because of so much of burden of MASLD, and we heard the prevalence is so high. So how much you think would be the genetics playing role here?
No, it's a very it's going to be a very complex issue, because here we have focused only on the genes which are responsible for fat accumulation in the liver. Apart from that one, the obesity genes are there, diabetic genes are there, and so many host of genes, other comorbid like hypertension genes are there. It is not possible to take out everything and then individually analyze this. Even in these things also, there's been a high amount of variations are there. Everyone has done only because of the cost factors which are involved, and they're all only doing the candidate genes only. So I have focused only on the ones which are directly related to the fatty livers, not the comorbid conditions.
Just one point to bring up is that when you're looking at these SNPs, these genes, I think it'd be important, what are we looking for? Fatty liver, for me, you don't need a SNP to actually detect fatty liver or risk of fatty liver. You can look at someone and with pretty good accuracy, you can tell that patient has fatty liver. PNLP3 is actually the only one that has been consistently been shown with outcomes, whether it's actually stage of fibrosis or even mortality has been associated. And I think that's one important thing. The other is that there are actually multi sort of gene packages that are coming together for example, risk of HCC among MASLD. So I think that may be sort of where we're going to go, is that to develop these maybe genotype phenotype combinations that can predict an outcome more than anything else.
I mean, those people who have been working on the genes, they have established the polygenic risk scores, PRS, that is called, and they did many genes. First, they said that add one or two genes, and then see whether that is going to increase the your identification and also progression of the disease. That has been done, and not only that, the polygenic, the multiple genes and plus the metabolic factors have been added in some. And then they found that if you add these metabolic factors, again the sensitivity is going to increase and catch the and also existence and progression of the disease.
One other point about FIP4. The 2 points I'd like to make is one, at the ADA guideline, we decided that we're going to take one cutoff, and that's 1.3, high or low. And the reason was that if you have a FIP4 of 1.3 to 2.67, you're going to do a fibroscan anyway if you have it. So why complicate that for primary care? Because it's a lot easier for primary care, because FIP4's role is not in hepatology. FIP4 role is actually in primary care, maybe endocrinology, where they do the test on the high-risk patient, then send them to you. That's one point that maybe to simplify it, we'll just need to unify around one value. The second point is that there are really major issues, although we all agree FIB4 is the best we have. When you look at age, the area under the curve for FIB4 is significantly worse when you get younger, or when you get very old. As you know, the cutoff for all the population is 2. And not only the FIB4 is worse than in India, but also in Latin America. And the third is actually it's not performing very well in diabetics. But regardless of all of that, that's the only thing we can have. We don't have anything else to improve upon it. But we need to look at this with a caveat that we all have to be working on the next version of a FIB4 test that will perform better in all of these groups.
I think we had this discussion while we were framing the global consensus guidelines, that why in India we use the cutoff of 1, which Rohit showed. The only difference was that when we had this INASL consensus coming in, we thought at 1.3 and the 2.67, they were both cutoffs, rule in, rule out for advanced fibrosis. So as a group, we all thought that the significant fibrosis is also very important. And if the FIB4 is less than 1, you are actually excluding any kind of fibrosis or significant fibrosis. That's the only, but I do agree. I think 1.3 still remains as for the advanced fibrosis. We took 1 only for, significant fibrosis. That was 1. Dr. Singh first.
Just to point out that the reality is that no one will stop with a FIB4 of 3.25, right? They will do a fibrosis.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Singh, please. Yeah.
2 comments. One is regarding these genes. There are centers in the country who do genetic analysis for every NAFLD patient they see. And in pancreatology, for idiopathic chronic pancreatitis, initial years they tried with a lot of genes. But see the clinical significance in a patient, and it doesn't make any difference. If at all, it will make a difference after doing a lot of, I think you require more research, whether you can identify that patient who requires regular screening for HCC. Beyond that, I don't think these genes are going to be of any use, number 1, because treatment is not going to differ. Next is regarding the NITs. The best NIT for a country like India, where all these, FIB4 and other things, the simple thing, if you can educate people, that keep your waist less than 50% of your height, that is most important. Because even this waist, hip, and other things are, not that accurate as much as waist height, because a tall person, for him, the waist will be different. A short person, for him, the waist will be different, the cutoff would be different. But waist height ratio, if it is more than half, if you bring it to less than half or keep it to less than half, that is the best way. You need not do all this so-called NITs, especially in a rural setting like India's.
Dr. For a small correction. Dr. Singh, there are umpty number of studies. See, genes may not be important for your practical management for a day-to-day. Umpty number of studies which are there, which have shown every aspect of a management issues, weight reduction, insulin resistance, bariatric surgery, everything has been shown to be present in those people who have got a PNPLA3. There has been a much different. A host of studies are there available. Whether we use it or not, that's a different thing. But you can't say that the genes are not important.
No, they are important only for research, not for an individual patient's management. It doesn't make any difference. You have to address the comorbidities. You have to ask him to reduce weight. You have to ask him to control his hypertension. That is all you are going to do. Nothing beyond that. Number 1. Number 2, if you have the genetic problem, then these are patients who will respond better to treatment, actually. They respond, and they are prone for any liver disease, whether it is alcoholic liver disease, whether it is NAFLD, for all diseases. They have a propensity to develop liver disease, that's all. Nothing beyond that. Treatment-wise, it's all the same. It won't make a difference. Are you going to give a gene-specific therapy? No.
I think these are sort of early studies. Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you combine gene with some of the genes with some of the other risk factors, it becomes even more important. But it's also the early sort of early times when you're looking at this. I almost can guarantee you that in 10 years you'll have accompanying sort of NIT. Some of these may be SNPs or genes that can determine who's a slow progressor versus fast progressor, who's going to be a responder or non-responder. But you're right, at the moment, this is why these SNPs are not a part of any guideline, because the clinical relevance of it at the moment is not there.
I think we need more data, but then there are ongoing studies by the groups. We know the AstraZeneca did publish 2 studies on the antisense nucleotide studies on which were targeting the PNPLA3, 148 variant. And, so there are ongoing studies which are actually targeting these gene polymorphism, but obviously we need more data on this. Rohit, yeah.
I think Dr. Singh's comment on waist height ratio. The waist height ratio is only going to tell us about the risk of steatosis. It's not going to really tell you about the risk of fibrosis
Steatohepatitis
or
fibrosis.
Dr. Suseja?
Can I? Yeah, I think Dr. Arka had a point, and then maybe.
Yeah. So my point was about the non-invasive tests, about FIB4 and all. So obviously we're using them as screening tests because of the high sensitivity. But conceptually in NASL, the reason why we chose that cutoff, like Sir said, was significant fibrosis, and we felt that significant fibrosis, that's the start point when your mortality risk goes up. F3, advanced fibrosis, it goes exponentially higher, but even significant fibrosis is a higher risk of mortality. But all these non-invasive tests have primarily been designed for the detection of advanced fibrosis. And even FIB4 doesn't perform, but now I think the goalpost has to shift even from a therapeutic point of view to significant fibrosis, because resmetirom will be for significant fibrosis. So if you look at the ASLD algorithm also, they says first FIB4, then fibroscan, etc. But then if we're using that cutoff of FIB4 less than 1.3, wouldn't we be missing out some amount of the patients who might benefit from pharmacotherapy? And so isn't it time that we develop scores for detection of significant fibrosis and not advanced fibrosis?
The negative predictive value of these tests was very high for excluding, so ruling out advanced fibrosis or cirrhosis. That was the initial reason for this. But now with at least resmetirom being only at least in the United States, only approved for F2 and F3, then you want to have positive predictive value. And they perform terribly worse for the F2 population. And that's really why multiple sort of combination will be the way to go. But we don't have those,
Sorry, Dr. Krishnadas, please go ahead.
Regarding FIB4, I think INASL has raised it up to 2 in patients who are elderly. So should INASL also be increasing the cutoff? That is one thing. And the second is regarding treatment. Dr. Sahu, now that resmetirom is practically available in India and Wegovy is coming, they have applied for FDA approval, I think, based on the Essence trial. So that also will be coming to India in a short period of time. So where would you position which patients to give Wegovy, which patients to give resmetirom, and which patients to give saroglitazar? Saroglitazar, we know that all of us have got very good experience with saroglitazar. So would resmetirom beat saroglitazar, or would it be a co-therapy?
Resmetirom is likely to be used in patients with significant fibrosis or F2 and more fibrosis. So we have data. Saroglitazar, we do not have great data that it helps inflammation, it helps normalization of ALT. But what we are looking at, India is looking at probably resmetirom will be the drug which will be used when it is available. Already we started preparing the drug. So it may not be a combination therapy in near future. It will be resmetirom which we are looking at now.
So what about GLP-1 injectable is going to be available?
GLP analog will be available, applied for
which patients would
approval.
You prefer to give GLP-1 which patients would you prefer to give resmetirom?
GLP analog, we need data from India, but we using the molecule for diabetes, obesity for a long time. This will be available. We applied for the clearance. And GLP analog with the patients which are having obesity and with comorbidity and this disease, GLP analog can be used. But resmetirom with patients with fibrosis, significant fibrosis.
Because usually this is just for your info. I mean, as happens with most of the drugs, resmetirom, I think in US annual cost is around $50,000, close to that. So now we have a company which has actually brought resmetirom to India. They're not manufacturing in India, but they're getting for our patients. And you'll be surprised that the cost is only 3,500 rupees or less than 5,000 rupees per month. We have started using resmetirom in our patients, right? But this is still, I would say, on a compassionate ground, as we did for sofosbuvir and the other drugs earlier. It's not still, but it's available through our legal route, but the cost is less than 5,000 rupees. And tomorrow, I think it will be available in India and will be manufactured in India as well.
The cost is always sort of the story of a hype initially, because over time, cost when you have more competition, the cost will go down. Hepatitis C is a prime example of this. I think it's fantastic that resmetirom is coming in India and should come everywhere in the world to be available at the level that's actually cost effective in that country, not at 50,000 of what is in the United States. So I think that's all great news. I think what you where are you going to use resmetirom versus saroglitazar versus GLP-1 agonist? You probably have to look at the profile of the patient. I think of the patient, most patients who come actually see me now in the United States, although semaglutide is not approved yet, it will be approved by the end of this year. They are already on semaglutide for diabetes or for obesity. So I can't add the semaglutide or change the dose. They are already on it. So they basically qualify for resmetirom. But here, I think that may be a different story.
So Bhutan and the Sri Lanka experience, and then we go to the questions. Yeah.
So in fact, we have 3 fibro scanners for a population of 20 million. So 2 are in the private sector. Vast majority of patients either cannot afford or they don't have the access to fibro scanners. And in fact, I wanted to ask from the second speaker, Dr. Rohit Gupta, what about shear wave elastography in assessing the fibrosis? And sir, you all can contribute.
So that APASL guidelines actually mention any of the elastography methods can be used. You can use shear wave, you can use vibration control, or you can use RFI also, acoustic radiation force impulse. So anyone can be. So it's not that you need fibroscan, but majority of guidelines actually both INASL and APASL mentions all. But the Taiwanese guidelines, which I mentioned fibroscan as the modality actually. But you can use any one of these modalities.
What about the validation? Like it depends on the brand and the manufacturer. Cutoffs are different from manufacturer to manufacturer, isn't it? When it comes to shear wave elastography.
That I'm not.
So what they're not equivalent. So when you're using shear wave or using RFI or using transelastography, you have to know what you're talking about. In terms of validation, the most actually is with transelastography. But I agree with you that I think if you have any elastography, you should use it. ELF is another story. ELF was actually, I think Siemens did not do a very good job in validating ELF in different population. I work very closely with Siemens at validating that in the United States for FDA. They are actually going for a second indication, and they are changing their threshold of what is actually considered to be. There are 2 issues. What is actually inconsistent with different stage, and the second issue that's going to be important for treatment is that what delta do you see in a fibroscan or in a ELF test? A change that you see that's consistent with response or lack of response to a drug. Those things need to be established. I know that Siemens is going to work with some hospitals here. We were just talking about this. Hopefully, it will become available here. But again, at the same cost, that's not $75 a pop. That has to be a lot lower, so that's actually affordable.
So sorry, but do you think, Professor Yunusi, the ELF does add or change our algorithm of managing these patients?
I actually think that if they do for example, in the old days or in the last year, the lower cutoff was 7.7. That's useless. The cutoff that should be used is about 9 or 9.2. The low cutoff.
I'm saying in addition to FIB4 and elastography.
So the FIB4, the ELF testings value is the fact that it has a lot more capacity for access. So you have to go to any lab and draw ELF test and send it to a central lab and do it. The same as of course, maybe not to the same degree, but we have great limitation in terms of FibroScan in the United States when you go outside large cities. So that's where actually ELF has a great opportunity.
Okay, Dr. Nipun and then Dr. Chalima.
So, just wanted to ask a quick question to all the panelists and Dr. Zubair. A pattern of FIB4 being so variable in determining significant fibrosis has been noticed, and systematic reviews showing at least ranging from 0.6 to 75%, 0.75. Is it population dependent? First question. Second, since there is a lot of variability and obviously it depends, the negative predictive value depends on the prevalence in a given situation in a given data set. It's data dependent, basically, the negative predictive value. So if we lower the cutoff, obviously the sensitivity is going to be much better, but at the cost of specificity, right? So the exact question is, First, whether it is population dependent, because several population, even in South Asian population, we did AI study based on to rule out significant fibrosis. AI performed better, obviously, to rule out significant fibrosis, but there was population differences even within the South Asian population.
So we have the 18,000 biopsies with ELF testing that's available with FIB4 testing, and we looked at regional performance. So in every region, not country by country, but region wise, and it certainly is different. It's actually, it performs very poorly here. It performs very poorly in Latin America. So that's one issue that's important to keep in consideration. But to me, I think it's no longer a single test. It's a single test to rule out something bad. That's basically it. In terms of ruling in, you need to have probably 2 or sometimes maybe even 3 tests. There are people who actually now advocate FIB4 followed by both FibroScan and ALF. So that's not cost effective. But if you look at a paper we published in Liver International about 6 months ago, 3 months ago, looking at cost effectiveness of these 6 pathways, FIB4 followed by FibroScan or ALF, for the United States, that was cost effective. That doesn't mean it's cost effective for India, but at least for the United States, it was cost effective. It's the combination that's important in terms of performance of the combination tests.
Yeah, just to add up to that point, we did a multi-centric study in which we had center from ours, PGI, and from Singapore. Showed very clearly FIB4, as Nipun saying, doesn't perform well in the South Asian population. Yeah. The second point, I just want to be talking too much about saroglitazole. Do we have histology data on saroglitazole? It's just phase 2, MR based, some reduction in fats, some reduction in transaminases. We don't have biopsy proven data.
No, I agree with you. The only biopsy proven data was in 102 patients, which was never published as a full paper, presented in a parcel 2020. And based on that, even the DCGI, kind of approved this. But yes, we do have a lot of real life data. It does show improvement in, the enzymes and the LSM and the CAP and all that. But yes, I take your point. I think there's no good histology based, good randomized control study.
Another drug that's not being considered by hepatologists but promoted by endocrinologists is pioglitazone. And in fact, there is no randomized large clinical trial of pioglitazone, but you can have Kinkuzi and a few other endocrinologists that will swear on it that you will have significant improvement of histology. And I think he may be right, but I don't use it.
Yeah, Akash. Yeah.
So the theme is peculiarities with Southeast Asia and Asia. We are all talking about FIB4. Our referral system it doesn't work like that. You don't have a primary care, you've got a cost effectiveness, then you go to secondary care, then you go to tertiary care. And we are formulating guidelines based upon a sequence of referral care which is non-existent. Here you've got ready access. If you see the real life story in India, you've got diabetologists who are not endocrinologists. They see a huge bulk of diabetes. That's real life story in rural urban India. And FIB4, I'm almost sure about it, performs terribly in diabetes. I don't know the reason. I think there's about 10 plus studies which have forced this. So why don't we have region specific pathways, say for a subgroup like diabetes, where we do establish a cost effective modeling of a FIB4 pathway with a T pathway with a combination pathway. With respect, it's not necessarily that in a country like India you have to follow a referral system pathway based upon FIB4 in a population like diabetes where it doesn't work, and follow that for all the patients.
I completely agree with you. The issue is the balance between simplicity and then sort of individualizing things, right? So if you want to simplify something, you make it more general, and that's what we are dealing with right now. But the way we actually looked at FIB4, the performance of this would be different. You have to choose different cutoff, even for different age groups. From a 15-year-old to 20, you have to use a different cutoff than a 30 to 35. So it makes it more complicated.
I have a small rejoinder to that. So all these test scores that we are talking about, whether it is FIP4 or ELF, if you're having to validate it across populations, ethnicities, subgroups, there's no uniform cutoff. Is it actually worth pursuing or advocating such expensive tests rather than, going directly for assessment of steatosis or going for fibrosis assessment by ultrasound, which is more cheap and readily available, and looking at fibrosis with RFA or FibroScan? Do we really need to be pursuing such a large study to be looking at different subpopulations? ELF does not perform well in South Asia. That's the first point. The second point is we have to be honest as hepatologists, we are not seeing all the MASL D that is there floating around. It's largely being seen by internists and it's being seen by endocrinologists. So we should not be, the ones that finally come to us are probably just a subsection of the population in general. So we need to be clear about what tests we are advocating. And I don't think we answered Dr. Devdas's question, which would be actually the end and the bottom line. If we have a choice of all three drugs, I wouldn't even count saroglitazar as a worthy drug, but that's my opinion. And we have resmetirom and we have semaglutide, injectable. So in which, given cost is not an issue, in which phenotype of patient would we recommend which drug? That's the only.
So I would say, coming back to your first issue, looking at, say, imaging like ultrasound that only detects fat. Remember, we published something in 2000 using MRI, liver biopsy, ultrasound, and CT scan. Ultrasound is very good to detect fat if there is more than 30% fat. The problem is, so you found fat, so what? It's not important. To me, fat in the liver is an indicator of not liver disease, of cardiac disease. What you're looking for is basically progressive liver disease, and that's what ultrasound is not able to detect fibrosis. So that's why in none of the guidelines recommends ultrasound. But having a ultrasound with a capacity to measure stiffness, then of course that's where we can actually advocate this. In terms of the profile of the patients who should actually get GLP-1 versus resmetirom, I can tell you that there are two different things. Resmetirom is actually a liver-targeted therapy. It doesn't have any impact on diabetes or obesity. And on the other hand, GLP-1 receptor agonist is more on the metabolic side. So if I have someone that has metabolic abnormality that's not managed, then I think that's what I would use. But if I have someone who's a little bit on the lean side, maybe resmetirom is the better drug. Maybe in India it would be better drug because you have such high prevalence of lean MASL D.
I think quickly maybe Rohit and then Orko and then, yeah, please.
So with India introducing MASL as part of National Program for Control of Non-Communicable Disease, it's very essential for us because a lot of these screening will happen at ASHA level. So we need to have a test which is readily available, which is cheap, and which is available at periphery level. So by saying that we can have a fibroscan and ultrasound, it's not going to really help.
That's the problem with the national program on MASL D, that the FIP4, when you say platelets not available, LFTs or AST/ALT not, how can you calculate FIP4? So that's a problem with the national program. That's why the FIP4 is still not being used at a primary care level. Yeah. So,
at least it's available in the secondary levels.
Yeah, it could be
available in the district hospitals,
rather than a
etc.,
primary
not
test.
at the PH. My real point was about FIP4 performance. It's easy to understand that FIP4 or any of these NITs may not perform well in specific populations, like say diabetic, like say elderly. But it's so difficult to understand why should there be ethnicity variance in its performance. In other words, if you have a risk factor which governs fibrosis, which is not included in FIP4, then obvious in that particular population, like say in diabetes itself will govern your risk of advanced fibrosis. So obviously in that population, FIP4 will not perform well. But in general, why is it that it should perform poorly in certain ethnicities, like say South Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America? My take on that, is it that there's a tremendous bias in what we are biopsying, and that is what you're comparing of FIP4 to. For instance, in India, nobody would biopsy any patient with MASLD until and unless there's a confounding, you're suspecting some other etiology, AIH or something, or if there is a discrepancy between FIP4 and LSM. So if there is a discrepancy between FIP4 and LSM in the first place when you're doing the biopsy, obviously FIP4 will not perform well. So maybe it's a bias in all the data that we are generating.
Just add into it, sir, about this regional ethnicity problems. one of the reasons for ethnical variations is your platelet count. There is wide variations in the platelet count based upon your region. When I moved from here to Uttar Pradesh, then to Bengal, you suddenly started seeing patients with low, and I was calculating FIB4 and everything was coming high. So then I discussed with
So
people.
they have low platelet
So
count?
the entire eastern coastal region have inherently got a low platelet count.
Low
and this is
platelet-
published literature, I think.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so
Sri
inherently
Lanka
they've
is
got low
almost the
platelet
Sri
same.
Lanka as well?
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of patients with low platelets.
Low platelet count of, unknown reason.
Well, not 150, less than 200.
Yeah. So we don't have normative data for what is normal platelet count.
Yeah. So that actually is not only true in platelet count, but it's also true in aminotransferases. You look at the component of what FIB4 is made out, and there are things that are basically sort of standardized based on a population. So the ALT and AST and platelet count in the United States is normalized to the general population. It's normal for that population, but it may not be normal for another population. That's I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the reason for the variability.
So Kalyan, maybe quiet, and I think that we need to wrap up here.
Sure. I want to add a comment on the Synergy phase 2 trial data that was published last year on genetics and therapeutics. So tirzepatide actually has decreased fat and also decreased the fibrosis across all PNPLA3. However, the MASH resolution was much higher in the C allele group than in the G allele group. So one of the things that we actually see, which is a real life scenario, is now that there's availability of semaglutide, tirzepatide, and resmetirom, and I practice in US, is why not start combo, right? So I think we need to keep the genetics in mind, although it's not prime time to test everybody, but I think the therapeutics and the efficacy of how people respond. So if I have an F3, F4, I would possibly, again, if he has a PNPLA3, I would actually think of starting combo therapy sooner than waiting a year or two and expect a miracle.
I think you're right. I think we need to do some more tests, because when you look at PNLP3 and resmetirom trial analysis, there was no difference.
Exactly.
If we look at semaglutide, there is no difference.
No.
Only tirzepatide. So the question is, was it the study or was it real?
Yeah.
If it's real, then that's really where we need to basically combine and develop sort of a profile for a single patient. You're right.
So concluding remarks from the chairpersons. Anything from you, chairpersons?
So I think we are running out of time. We'd like to thank all the speakers and the audience for your patient listening and the contribution for the discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to all the chairpersons and speakers for creating an inclusive environment for all the participants. With this, we now arrive to our final and crucial session focusing on solutions and future directions. And with profound gratitude, I invite on stage our respected chairpersons for the session. Dr. Sang Ji Lim from National University Health System, Singapore. Welcome, sir. Dr. Sunil Taneja from PGI, Chandigarh. Sir is also the organizing secretary of INASL 2025. Dr. Nipun Verma from PGI, Chandigarh, and Dr. Babulal Meena from PGI, Chandigarh. Now I turn the time over to the chairpersons.
So for the first talk, I would request Dr. Ajit to come on the dais, and he's going to talk about prevention and control of MASL in South Asia and Southeast Asia.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Ajay, Dr. Zubair, and to the GNC for giving me the opportunity to speak on prevention. I think after so much of complexities in MASLD, I think the prevention is the only hope. So I'll be talking about prevention and control in South Asia and Southeastern Asia countries, like what they are doing, and then we can have a discussion. So we start with the WHO's first guideline on non-communicable diseases, which was launched way back in 2013, and then extended to 2030 targets also, the same guidelines. If you try to search for fatty liver or steatotic liver disease, you'll not find the term in the whole guideline. Yes, they mention about hepatic diseases, but that also under other non-communicable diseases. They talk about reducing common risk factors, which definitely going to benefit MASLD also, but they have not talked about anything about fatty liver disease related cirrhosis or fatty liver disease related liver cancers. So this I will not go into detail. The only thing which I want to mention is now Indonesia is not the part of Southeast Asia region. On 12th of May 2025, it is now moved to Western Pacific region. You can see it's a reassignment. So earlier it was in Wipro, and now again it's back to Western Pacific region. So this is WHO Southeast Asia regional roadmap towards healthier region. So if you see the priorities of this region, the priorities is essential services, emergency preparedness, medicines. So still we are struggling with, you know, the basic healthcare services and communicable diseases, and definitely we are not looking that much towards non-communicable disease, and fatty liver is definitely out of this whole document. I've tried to search it, nothing was there even for liver diseases. They talked about prioritizing the risk factors for non-communicable diseases. They are prioritizing the non-communicable disease at few points. They also talked about comprehensive primary health care, which can take care of the health of the community, of the people of the country, of the region. But they have not mentioned anything about liver diseases. Definitely screening and treatment of non-communicable disease, as mentioned in most of the sessions, that if we manage comorbidities, we can manage MASLD also. So that was mentioned. So this is a snapshot of the whole talk. I can end up with this slide also, but I'll take much time, as everybody has taken so much of time. So so this tells us about. I mean, we are not doing that good in non-communicable diseases also. There are still, you know, this graph is still patchy for different countries. And though we are trying to have NCT targets and we are trying to achieve that, and I hope that if we'll go good with non-communicable diseases, definitely we'll take care of MASLD also. So this was the paper from Jeffrey Lazarus and his team, and they did a global NAFLD policy review and preparedness index for all the countries in the world. And they talked about, they have collected data about policies, guidelines, civil awareness, epidemiology, and data of MASLD, detection and management. And the finding, which is there in the red color, the research found that no country was found to be well prepared. So this is the truth for whole world when we talk about MASLD. And luckily and fortunately, and I'm really glad to know that India topped the whole list by scoring 42.7 score out of the whole parameters which were assessed out of 100. And when I looked out for the countries of Southeast Asia region, no country was there, because they also mentioned a significant number of countries. That means around 1/3 of the countries, they scored a 0 for MASLD preparedness. I thought that I should tell you about the Global Fund Grant Cycle 7, which is recently released last month only. And you can see that for every countries, the Global Fund allotment is now decreased. And this is because of the harsh decisions taken by the US. And this will definitely impact not only non-communicable diseases, MASLD, but other health priorities also in the region. If we talk about alcohol, we were talking about Dr. Shalimar. He said that alcohol is really very important, and it definitely affects the outcome also and impact the whole natural history of MASLD. So alcohol policy landscape, if we talk about India, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. So India, we are lacking, you know, for alcohol policy, and we don't have any uniform policy. But you can see that there are many states who has, you know, themselves, they have banned alcohol in their respective states. For even legal drinking age, there is a variation in the whole country, and there is lack of safe consumption guidelines. And if we go into and look into the national health policy, which was released in 2017, they try to aim to increase the taxation on alcohol, but nowhere we are trying to, you know, have a strict policies. There is data which says that if there are strict policies against alcohol, you can see a reduction in alcoholic liver disease cases also, and reduction in mortality due to alcoholic liver disease also. So this is the status for other countries from Southeast Asia and South Asian region, and you can see that there is prohibition for nationals, for Muslims in some Muslim countries which are very strict about alcohol. Otherwise, there is some increase in taxation, and some warnings is used. It is not as good as for tobacco in different parts of the world. For Singapore, they don't have any specific program for MASLD, but definitely they have clinical guidelines for NAFLD. They also launched a program on war on diabetes, as we were talking about diabetes, the close relationship between diabetes and MASLD. So they are on the war on diabetes, which is a flagship national campaign targeting healthier food environments, Screen for Life program, and workplace health programs, which will definitely going to benefit the diabetic patients and indirectly benefit MASLD patient also in Singapore. In Afghanistan, the above statistics is about how many percentage of deaths they are attributed to non-communicable disease. What is the probability of premature mortality from non-communicable disease? This range is almost similar for all South Asian and Southeastern countries. So non-communicable disease is a priority. They have a national action plan. They have different supports from WHO also. The surveys, they are also collecting data on non-communicable diseases, but no dedicated MASLD program. Similar for Bangladesh also, there are some NGOs, some hospitals who are doing good work in Bangladesh, but nothing from the side of the government other than NCD action plan. Similar for Bhutan, some initiatives they can indirectly benefit MASLD, like Move for Health, alcohol and tobacco control, screening programs, and multi-sectoral NCD plan, but nothing about MASLD. Same for Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Malaysia. There are some guidelines regarding dietary guidelines, and there are some action plans for active living for physical activity, but nothing for MASLD. Similar for Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, Timor-Leste, some of activities they are done. If we talk about India, let's go in detail about India, because I have much knowledge about India also. We have NAFLD integration to non-communicable disease program way back in February 2021. Operation guidelines was released in that month. And then these guidelines were again revised, the last one in September 2024. So we have operation guidelines. We have a module for medical officers also, but on ground, I mean, a lot of more work is required to be done. So as we were discussing, if we talk about the care levels in India, we have primary health center level, and in this operation guidelines, we want our medical officers to screen them. Our ASHA workers, peripheral health workers, they'll use community-based assessment checklist. I'll show you it in the next slide. So this is a very simple checklist which uses 6 questions, like what is your age, do you smoke, alcohol, waist circumference, as mentioned by Dr. P.N. Rao, that's more important than BMI. So we are using that waist circumference for our healthcare workers. And then physical activity, and then whether they have a family history of diabetes or not. If the score is 4 or more than 4, then these people, they are at high risk of developing non-communicable diseases, including NAFLD, and they should be referred to higher centers so that we can get their FIB4 done, we can get their transient elastography done if it's available. In the last slide, if you see on the right side, operation guidelines mentions that every district, we have around 750 districts. So as the slide shown by Dr. Manu sir, there are only 150 machines of FibroScan in the country. So there are 750 districts, and guidelines says that every district hospital should have a fatty liver, should have a transient elastography machine so that we can do the risk stratification using that machine. We tried to did the validation of the CBAC for NAFLD, and the area under the curve for ROC was 60.65, that is 65% accuracy, which is not that bad for a public health intervention tool. Other than integration of fatty liver, India is also running Eat Right India movement since 2020. We have done a lot of trainings for state trainers, and also we have trained CHOs. CHO is community health officers who are posted at health and wellness centers, which are also now known as AAM, Arogya Ayushman Mandirs. They are catering the population of around 3,500 to 5,000 population. And these CHOs now, they are trained to know about the diet, which is good, which is bad, and they try to do these health awareness and health education activities in the community using these simple charts. We also have a Fit India movement run by Ministry of Health and Welfare, which was started in August 2019, and it tries to make all Indian citizens active using either yoga or any way of exercise. And the government is trying to promote it. When we talk about health and wellness center, they also have an area where they do some health physical activity related exercises so that the community can be made aware about the importance of physical activity. Then this is very important. We have discussed it in last sessions also, that when we talk about the food which our community is eating, there should be front of package labeling should be there. This is the global status. The orange countries, colored in orange, they have voluntarily adopted this front of package labeling, and those in pink, they have mandatory. So as mentioned by my previous speaker, that Thailand and Sri Lanka from South Asia, they are using it as a mandatory thing, that whenever you pack anything, on the front of that packaging, not on the back, you have to mention about the nutritive value of that food product. So in India, we started it in 2014. It's still in the advocacy phase. We still do not have any act for FOPL, but it is in the phase that we'll get color-coded labels, labeling and display regulations. Mainly, FOPL is targeting high fat, high salt, and high sugar foods, so that they can given some health star rating, so that our people, they can decide upon by seeing that rating whether they have to use or not to use. So this is, I'm not going to detail, but we are using traffic light food labeling system. We are also using Nutri-Score by using different parameters, mainly targeting sugar, energy, fat, salt, so that we can take a decision whether it's healthy or it's not healthy. Then multiple capacity building efforts are done by the Government of India, State NHM, and Public Health Foundation of India, so that we can train our medical officers so they can serve their community wherever they are posted. This is done by INASL Task Force on Preventive Hepatology on World Liver Day this year only. We did liver education, liver health education in the school in the Chandigarh, and then one liver health education campaign in the college in Rishikesh, and also fatty liver screening in the diabetic clinic, and then link them to care if they have steatosis or liver stiffness. Then this is done last month only, trying to train or sensitize the barbers and tailors, so that if whenever they are seeing their clients, they can pick up these early signs of insulin resistance or diabetes or obesity by seeing acanthosis nigricans or skin tags or high waist circumference or high neck circumference, and then they can advise their clients to go and get themselves tested for liver care. Community screening efforts is very important, because we all know that this is asymptomatic disease. We have to go out, reach out, and we have to screen them and link them to care if we want them to treat early. Then community health education is important for community mobilization, so that they can understand the problem. As we are discussing, they should also be knowing about what this disease is and how lethal it can be if it is not been cured or seen in time. Then this is the INASL endorsed book on preventive hepatology, which fortunately will be launching on inaugural session on 8th of August. And this inaugural function of INASL 2025, which comprehensively covers all preventive strategies for all liver diseases, which is required to take care of the disease in the country. So take home message is simple. We know that the burden is high. The low hanging fruit is integration with non-communicable disease program. Community will not be mobilized, will not get people tested if they are not knowing about the disease. So health promotion activity is important. Disease is complex, but the preventive questions are simple, that you have to just go for healthy diet and regular exercise. There is knowledge to practice gap, which need to be filled, and this can be filled only by health promotion activities. And we should do passive screening activities followed by active screening whenever we find hotspots for this disease, and then link them to care. Thank you so much.
Time is running on, so thank you very much. We'll move on to the last two speakers of the session, the dynamic duo, Professor Zubair Yunusi and Professor Ajay Duseja. They're going to talk about proposals for separate registry of SLD in South Asia and Southeast Asia as a component of C and GNC.
This session is only to wrap it up now. I think.
Oh, is it okay?
We don't have any slides. So, and then we thought we'll have some discussion and wrap it up. So I think before I open this to Professor Yunusi, this evening, the objective of today's theme, MASL in South Asia and Southeast Asia, was that what is the quantum, what is the, whether obviously we know this is huge, but then is the pathophysiology different? Is the treatment going to be different, and what we all together can do about this? So in that direction, what we thought was, there is a global MASH or a NASH Council and a global liver registry. In India and in South Asia and in Asia, we don't have those registries. In India, we have a registry called Indian Consortium on MASLD. This we started around 6-7 years back. We have completed 2 phases, and the total count when we stopped the second phase was 10,668 patient data, which we have already collected. This is from India. From Asia, there's only one registry, but not really registry. This is a group where we keep doing, different studies on SOS basis, and that's the gut and obesity group, Go Asia group. We are published, but this is not a registry. So in general, there are no registries. Now the question is to the House and to everybody to discuss is that having a separate registry from Asia, as I said, we have only in India and Go Asia group, will it really help in reducing this burden of MASLD? Will it really help us in understanding this disease better, pathophysiologically? And will it also help in treating better these patients? That's the whole idea. And that's the question which is open to everyone here. And I think we can together answer with the help from Professor Yunusi.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks. First of all, thank you. Thank to the organizers to really put together the best GNC meeting I've been to. So thank you, AJ. I think there are two things from this meeting. One, this disease is very common in this world. This entity, the disease is being MASH, is very common in this area. Two, there are lots of questions that has not been answered. These questions need to be answered. So that actually brings us to the point that we need to actually get more engaged and involved and try to ask the questions, bring the data, analyze it, interpret it, and sort of publish it. The advantage of having local registries is that it will focus you on your issues and your problems. The disadvantage of actually having only local registry is that you won't learn from others in other sort of populations and other areas. And I think that's going to be important in this disease. This disease is not an American disease or a European disease or an Indian disease. It's across the world, and it's very heterogeneous. And I think that's the advantage that you have as a sort of multinational registry. And of course, the other issue is the logistics. It took me literally 5-6 years to build the registry and the coalition, and it is not cheap, and it requires a lot of effort, a lot of expertise, a lot of money. And we happened to at that time do a lot of sort of research and had enough funding to build this for the good of our community, our academic sort of community, to understand this. This has not been funded by any pharmaceutical industry. It came from ours. So one model is what I do in Saudi Arabia, in Middle East, and in Turkey. Yusuf Yilmaz, Yusuf, he basically is the country sort of guru of MASLD, and he develops his own database in conjunction with us, so that you keep your registry if you want to, sort of locally, and then use the platform of the Global NASH Council, so you don't have to invest and then take your data. So what you have is that you will have your data, you will own your data, you will do your analysis, you'll publish it yourself, and you get the support from the Global NASH Council in terms of both registry as well as the analysis and medical writing and all of that. So that's one option to consider. So these things worked out very well. In fact, for Yusuf, the other thing that worked out very well was that he is asking all the other hepatologists in Turkey to send patients to his site. So send the data to his site. So he sort of is the central site, and he gets the data and then he shares it with us, but he probably will keep some of the registry for themselves. The last point I'd like to make is that anyone who's in this room or anybody that that needs to be a part of the Global NASH Council, please send me an email, send AJ an email. You're a member. We'll just make sure that the more we have, the better it is. And I will also encourage you to engage at least 2 other sort of a group of colleagues. Pediatric hepatologists, very important area, and we need to understand even more, because the scarcity of data there is just immense. And second, from each country we have to have endocrinologists, diabetologists, not endocrinologists. So I think we have, like I said, about 10% of our groups are from endocrinology and diabetology, but I think we need to have representation from everywhere. But again, this is up to you how you want to do this, how you want to create your registry, and how do we support you. Ultimately, the Global NASH Council will support you either way, whether you want to build it here alone, you want to build it together, or a combination of both.
Okay, I think we need to finish by 9. So any quick thoughts on this from the chairpersons, from anybody? How should we go about, how do we improve the story of MASL in Asia or South Asia or Southeast Asia? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I take my hats off to all of you because if you look at it from the viral hepatitis viewpoint, right, where the diagnosis is pretty clear cut, the treatment's fairly clear cut, pathogenesis of disease clear cut. We have 14% of people who are diagnosed globally, 30% for C, 14% for B. And the world, WHO has already set targets. We're so far behind, it's a kind of a joke. So, you guys, you've got a challenge of the diagnosis, the pathophysiology, and then the therapeutics. This is work in progress, evolving research. So you have a big challenge ahead of you. So, I'm glad you're taking up this registry, but still have a long way to go, I think.
I think this is a brilliant idea because there's so many countries in Southeast Asia where you do not have access to registry outside the country. So, I mean, if you have countries who are contributing to the capital, as you said, that they can be a leader and then that leader contributes to the Global NASH Council, that would be a great idea.
And my take is, since this is a global disease and we are all working for, curbing this hepatological disorders, and now is the era of artificial intelligence. We all know it is data hungry. We have a lot of heterogeneity, lot of questions to be answered. We should have the biorepositories in addition to the clinical data. If we all do this together, we can answer several of these questions in very short span of time with large language models being available today. It's tremendous. The capacity is tremendous.
And I agree with you completely. The one thing I would say about biobanking, because I've been doing it for 25 years, we have about 200,000 specimens. Number one, we all have to agree on standard collection and storage of what we're going to collect, how we're going to collect it, how we're going to store it. Number one. Number two, when we do any testing, because transporting biological material across borders is almost impossible. So it has to be done locally. So if you want to do a PET testing, we should use the same sort of methodology and approach. That will make it happen. But I agree with you. I think having for those who can make it, having a biobank would be very valuable.
Any more thoughts, comments before we wrap it up? Main this thing, and then we do that will be easier. And if you can submit.
No, I think you certainly will be supported. You and I can talk a little bit more about this, but again, it's going to be important to contribute. Dr. Bawa has just joined us recently from Myanmar, and he has been really very active. So the more we get patient information, it doesn't have to be complete, the more contribution we can make to the field. And we can work about how to use the infrastructure that we have for that.
Thank you.
You want to take a picture?
Take a picture?
Yeah. Sitting right there.
Let's have a picture.
Please, speakers, join for the commemorative photograph. And we conclude with this final round. Distinguished delegates, faculty members, we conclude this enriching session. And thank you for your participation. Now we invite you to join us for dinner at the Baluchi and have a wonderful evening. We look forward to seeing you at the main conference sessions starting tomorrow. Thank you. This is Dr. Ankita Pandey, setting off for the day. Thank you. Thank you, sir.